Hey, Fire, how you doing?
The guild dares not risk that. Desperate people are the most dangerous, Gurney said. Are we not desperate? Stilgar asked. Gurney scowled at him. You haven't lived with a Fremen dream, Paul cautioned. Still is thinking of all the water we've spent on bribes, the years of waiting we've added before Arrakis can bloom. He's not... Ah, Gurney scowled. Why is he so gloomy? Stilgar asked. He's always gloomy before a battle, Paul said. It's the only form of good humor Gurney allows himself. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Gurney's face, the teeth showing white above the chip cut of his still suit. It glooms me much to think on all the poor Harkonnen souls we'll dispatch unshriven, he said. Stilgar chuckled. He talks like a Vadaikin. Gurney was born a Death Commando, Paul said. And he thought, yes, let them occupy their minds with small talk before we test ourselves against that force on the plain. He looked to the gap in the rock wall and back to Gurney, found that the troubadour warrior had resumed a brooding scowl. Worry saps the strength, Paul murmured. You told me that once, Gurney. My duke, Gurney said. My chief worry is the atomics. If you use them to blast a hole in the shield wall, those people up there won't use atomics against us, Paul said. They don't dare, for the same reason that they cannot risk our destroying the source of the spice. But the injunction against the injunction, Paul barked. It's fear, not the injunction, that keeps the houses from hurling atomics against each other. The language of the Great Convention is clear enough. Use of atomics against humans shall be cause for planetary obliteration. We're going to blast the shield wall, not humans. It's too fine a point, Gurney said. The hair splitters up there will welcome any point, Paul said. Let's talk no more about it. He turned away, wishing he actually felt that confident. Presently he said, What about the city people? Are they in position yet? Yes, Stilgar muttered. Paul looked at him. What's eating you? I never knew the city man could be trusted completely, Stilgar said. I was a city man myself once, Paul said. Stilgar stiffened. His face grew dark with blood. Wadib knows I did not mean... I know what you meant still. The test of a man isn't what you think he'll do, it's what he actually does. These city people have Fremen blood. It's just that they haven't yet learned how to escape their bondage. We'll teach them. Stilgar nodded, spoke in a rueful tone. The habits of a lifetime, Wadib. On the funeral plain, we learn to despise the men of the communities. Paul glanced at Gurney, saw him studying Stilgar. Tell us, Gurney, why were the city folk down there driven from their homes by the Sardaukar? An old trick, my duke. They thought to burden us with refugees.
I gotta go grab some papers.
It's been so long since guerrillas were effective that the mighty have forgotten how to fight them, Paul said. The Sardaukar have played into our hands. They grabbed some city women for their sport, decorated their battle standards with the heads of the men who objected, and they've built up a fever of hate among people who otherwise would have looked on the coming battle as no more than a great inconvenience, and the possibility of exchanging one set of masters for another. The Sardaukar recruit for us, Stilgar. The city people do seem eager, Stilgar said. Their hate is fresh and clear, Paul said. That's why we use them as shock troops. The slaughter among them will be fearful, Gurney said. Stilgar nodded agreement. They were told the odds, Paul said. They know every Sardaukar they kill will be one less for us. You see, gentlemen, they have something to die for. They discovered they're a people. They're awakening. A muttered exclamation came from the watcher of the telescope. Paul moved to the rock slit, asked, What is it out there? A great commotion, Muad'Dib, the watcher hissed. At that monstrous metal tent, a surface car came from Rimwall West, and it was like a hawk into a nest of rock partridge. Our captive Sardaukar have arrived, Paul said. They've a shield around the entire landing field now, the watcher said. I can see the air dancing even to the edge of the storage yard where they kept the spice. Now they know who it is they fight, Gurney said. Let the Harkonnen beasts tremble and fret themselves, that an Atreides yet lives. Paul spoke to the Fedaykin at the telescope. Watch the flagpole atop the Emperor's ship. If my flag is raised there, it will not be, Gurney said. Paul saw the puzzled frown on Stilgar's face, said, if the Emperor recognized my claim, he'll signal by restoring the Atreides flag to Arrakis. We'll use the second plan then, move only against the Harkonnens. Sardaukar will stand aside and let us settle the issue between ourselves. I've no experience with these off-world things, Stilgar said. I've heard of them, but it seems unlikely. You don't need experience to know what they'll do, Gurney said. They're sending a new flag up on the tall ship, the Watcher said. The flag is yellow, with a black and red circle in the center. There's a subtle piece of business, Paul said. The Chone Company flag. It's the same as the flag at the other ships, the Fedaykin guard said. I don't understand, Stilgar said. A subtle piece of business indeed, Gurney said. Had he sent up the Atreides banner, he'd have had to live by what that meant. Too many observers about. He could have signaled with the Harkonnen flag on his staff, a flat declaration that'd have been. But no, he sends up the Chone rag. He's telling the people up there, Gurney pointed towards space, where the profit is. He's saying he doesn't care if it's an Atreides here or not. How long till the storm strikes the shield wall? Paul asked. Stilgar turned away, consulted one of the Fedaykin in the bowl. Presently he returned, said, Very soon, one deep. Sooner than we expected. It's a great-great-grandmother of a storm. Perhaps even more than you wished. It's my storm, Paul said, and saw the silent awe on the faces of the Fedaykin who heard him. Though it shook the entire world, it could not be more than I wished. Would it strike the shield wall full on? Close enough to make no difference, Stilgar said. A courier crossed from the hole that led down into the basin, said, The Sardaukar and Harkonnen patrols are pulling back one deep. They expect the storm to spill too much sand into the basin for good visibility, Stilgar said. They think we'll be in the same fix. Tell our gunners to set their sights well before visibility drops, Paul said. They must knock the nose off every one of those ships as soon as the storm has destroyed the shields. He stepped to the wall of the bowl, pulled back a fold of the camouflage cover and looked up at the sky. The horsetail twistings of blow sand could be seen against the dark of the sky. Paul restored the cover and said, Start sending our men down, Still. Will you not go with us? Stilgar asked. I'll wait here a bit with the Fedaykin, Paul said. Stilgar gave a knowing shrug toward Gurney, moved to the hole in the rock wall, was lost in its shadows. The trigger that blasts the shield wall aside, that I leave in your hands, Gurney, Paul said. You will do it? I'll do it. Paul gestured to a Fedaykin lieutenant, said, Otheim, start moving the Czech patrols out of the blast area. They must be out of there before the storm strikes. The man bowed, followed Stilgar. Gurney leaned into the rock slit, spoke to the man at the telescope. Keep your attention on the south wall. It'll be completely undefended until we blow it. Dispatch a Cielago with a time signal, Paul ordered. Some ground cars are moving toward the south wall, the man at the telescope said. Some are using projectile weapons. Testing. Our people are using body shields as you commanded. The ground cars have stopped. In the abrupt silence, Paul heard the wind devils playing overhead, the front of the storm. Sand began to drift down into their bowl through gaps in the cover. A burst of wind caught the cover, whipped it away. Paul motioned his Fedaykin to take shelter, crossed to the men at the communications equipment near the tunnel mouth. Gurney stayed beside him. Paul crouched over the signalmen. One said, A great-grandmother of a storm, one Dune. Paul glanced up at the darkening sky, said, Gurney, have the South Wall observers pulled out? He had to repeat his order, shouting above the growing noise of the storm. Gurney turned to obey. Paul fastened his face filter, tightened the stillsuit hood. Gurney returned. Paul touched his shoulder, pointed to the blast trigger set into the tunnel mouth beyond the signalmen. Gurney went into the tunnel, stopped there, one hand at the trigger, his gaze on Paul. "We are getting no messages," the signalman beside Paul said. "Much static." Paul nodded, kept his eye on the time standard dial in front of the signalman. Presently, Paul looked at Gurney, raised a hand, returned his attention to the dial. The time counter crawled around its final circuit. "Now!" Paul shouted and dropped his hand. Gurney depressed the blast trigger. It seemed that a full second passed before they felt the ground beneath them ripple and shake. A rumbling sound was added to the storm's roar. The Fedaykin watcher from the telescope appeared beside Paul, the telescope clutched under one arm. "The shield wall is breached, Muad'Dib," he shouted. "This storm is on them, and our gunners already are firing." Paul thought of the storm sweeping across the basin, the static charge within the wall of sand that destroyed every shield barrier in the enemy camp. "This storm!" someone shouted. "We must get under cover, Muad'Dib." Paul came to his senses, feeling the sand needles sting his exposed cheeks. "We are committed," he thought. He put an arm around the signalman's shoulder, said, "Leave the equipment! There's more in the tunnel!" He felt himself being pulled away. Fedaykin pressed around him to protect him. They squeezed into the tunnel mouth, feeling its comparative silence, turned a corner into a small chamber with glow globes overhead and another tunnel opening beyond. Another signalman sat there at his equipment. "Much static," the man said. A swirl of sand filled the air around them. "Seal off this tunnel!" Paul shouted. A sudden pressure of stillness showed that his command had been obeyed. "Is the way down to the basin still open?" Paul asked. A Fedaykin went to look, returned, said, "The explosion caused a little rock to fall, but the engineers say it is still open. They're cleaning up with laser beams." "Tell them to use their hands," Paul barked. "There are shields active down there." "They are being careful, Muad'Dib," the man said. But he turned to obey. The signalmen from outside pressed past them, carrying their equipment. "I told those men to leave their equipment," Paul said. "Fremen do not like to abandon equipment, Muad'Dib," one of his Fedaykin chided. "Men are more important than equipment now," Paul said. "We'll have more equipment than we can use soon, or have no need for any equipment." Gurney Halleck came up beside him and said, "I heard them say the way down is open. We're very close to the surface here, my lord. Should the Harkonnens try to retaliate in kind." "They're in no position to retaliate," Paul said. "They're just now finding out that they have no shields and are unable to get off Arrakis." "The new command post is all prepared, though, my lord," Gurney said. "They've no need of me in the command post yet," Paul said. "The plan would go ahead without me. We must wait for the—" "I'm getting a message, Muad'Dib," said the signalman with communications equipment. The man shook his head, pressed the receiver phone against his ear. "Much static." He began scribbling on a pad in front of him, shaking his head, writing, waiting. Paul crossed to the signalman's side. The Fedaykin stepped back, giving him room. He looked down at what the man had written, read, "Raid on Sietch Tabor, captives, Aliyah. Families of dead are they, son of Muad'Dib." Again the signalman shook his head. Paul looked up to see Gurney staring at him. "The message is garbled," Gurney said. "The static. You don't know that—" "My son is dead," Paul said, and knew as he spoke that it was true. "My son is dead, and Aliyah is a captive, hostage." He felt emptied, a shell without emotions. Everything he touched brought death and grief, and it was like a disease that could spread across the universe. He could feel the old man wisdom, the accumulation out of the experiences from countless possible lives. Something seemed to chuckle and rub its hands within him. And Paul thought, how little the universe knows about the nature of real cruelty.
And Muad'Dib stood before them, and he said, "Though we deem the captive dead, yet does she live. For her seed is my seed, and her voice is my voice. And she sees unto the farthest reaches of possibility. Yea, unto the veil of the unknowable does she see because of me." From Arrakis Awakening by the Princess Irulan.
The Baron Vladimir Harkonnen
Right
stood with
back.
eyes downcast in the Imperial Audience Chamber, the oval Selamlik within the Padishah Emperor's hutment. With covert glances, the Baron had studied the metal-walled room and its occupants. The Nolkers, the pages, the guards, the troop of House Sardaukar drawn up around the walls, standing at ease there beneath the bloody and tattered captured battle flags that were the room's only decoration. Voices sounded from the right of the chamber, echoing out of a high passage. Make way! Make way for the royal person! The Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV came out of the passage into the audience chamber, followed by his suite. He stood waiting while his throne was brought, ignoring the Baron, seemingly ignoring every person in the room. The Baron found that he could not ignore the royal person, and studied the Emperor for a sign, any clue to the purpose of this audience. The Emperor stood poised, waiting, a slim, elegant figure in a grey Sardaukar uniform with silver and gold trim. His thin face and cold eyes reminded the Baron of the Duke Leto, long dead. There was that same look of the predatory bird. But the Emperor's hair was red, not black, and most of that hair was concealed by a Burseg's ebon helmet with the imperial crest in gold upon its crown. Pages brought the throne. It was a massive chair carved from a single piece of Hegel quartz, blue-green translucency shot through with streaks of yellow fire. They placed it on the dais, and the Emperor mounted, seated himself. An old woman in a black Abba robe with hood drawn down over her forehead detached herself from the Emperor's suite, took up station behind the throne, one scrawny hand resting on the quartz back. Her face peered out of the hood like a witch caricature, sunken cheeks and eyes, an overlong nose, skin mottled and with protruding veins. The Baron stilled his trembling at sight of her. The presence of the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayam, the Emperor's truth-sayer, betrayed the importance of this audience. The Baron looked away from her, studied the suite for a clue. There were two of the guild agents, one tall and fat, one short and fat, both with bland grey eyes. And among the lackeys stood one of the Emperor's daughters, the Princess Irulan, a woman they said was being trained in the deepest of the Bene Gesserit ways, destined to be a reverend mother. She was tall, blonde, face of chiseled beauty, green eyes that looked past and through him. My dear Baron, the Emperor had deigned to notice him. The voice was baritone and with exquisite control. It managed to dismiss him while greeting him. The Baron bowed low, advanced to the required position 10 paces from the dais. I came at your summons, Majesty. Summons? The old witch cackled. Now, Reverend Mother, the Emperor chided, but he smiled at the Baron's discomfiture, said, First, you will tell me where you've sent your minion, to fear Howard. The Baron darted his gaze left and right, reviled himself for coming here without his own guards. Not that they'd been much use against Sardaukar, still. Well, the Emperor said, he has been gone these 5 days, Majesty. The Baron shot a glance at the guild agents, back to the Emperor. He was to land at a smuggler base, or attempt infiltrating the camp of the Fremen fanatic, this Wadib. Incredible, the Emperor said. One of the witch's claw-like hands tapped the Emperor's shoulder. She leaned forward, whispered in his ear. The Emperor nodded, said, 5 days, Baron. Tell me, why aren't you worried about his absence? But I am worried, Majesty. The Emperor continued to stare at him, waiting. The Reverend Mother emitted a cackling laugh. What I mean, Majesty, the Baron said, is that Howard will be dead within another few hours anyway. And he explained about the latent poison and need for an antidote. How clever of you, Baron, the Emperor said. And where are your nephews, Raban, and the young Fade Routher? The storm comes, Majesty. I sent them to inspect our perimeter lest the Fremen attack under cover of the sand. Perimeter, the Emperor said. The word came out as though it puckered his mouth. The storm won't be much here in the basin. and that Fremen rabble won't attack while I'm here with 5 legions of Sardaukar. Surely not, Majesty, the Baron said. But error on the side of caution cannot be censured. Ah, the Emperor said, censure. That I'm not to speak of how much time this Arrakis nonsense has taken from me, nor the Chome Company profits pouring down this rat hole, nor the court functions and affairs of state I've had to delay, even cancel because of this stupid affair. The Baron lowered his gaze, frightened by the Imperial anger. The delicacy of his position here, alone and dependent upon the convention and the dictum familia of the great houses, fretted him. Does he mean to kill me? The Baron asked himself. He couldn't. Not with the other great houses waiting up there. He can any excuse to gain from this upset
Hey,
on the
Story,
racket.
how you doing?
Have you taken hostages? The Emperor asked. It's useless, Majesty, the Baron said. These mad Fremen hold a burial ceremony for every captive and act as though such a one were already dead. So, the Emperor said. And the Baron waited, glancing left and right at the metal walls of the Salamvik, thinking of the monstrous fan metal tent around him. Such unlimited wealth it represented that even the Baron was awed. He brings pages, the Baron thought, and useless court lackeys. His women and their companions, hairdressers, designers, everything. All the fringe parasites of the court, all here, fawning, slyly plotting, roughing it with the Emperor. Here to watch him put an end to this affair, to make epigrams over the battles and idolize the wounded. Perhaps you've never sought the right kind of hostages, the Emperor said. He knows something, the Baron thought. Fear sat like a stone in his stomach until he could hardly bear the thought of eating. Yet the feeling was like hunger, and he poised himself several times in his suspenses on the point of ordering food brought to him. But there was no one here to obey his summons. Do you have any idea who this Muad'Dib could be? The Emperor asked. One of the Umma, surely, the Baron said. A Fremen fanatic, a religious adventurer. They crop up regularly on the fringes of civilization. Your Majesty knows this. The Emperor glanced at his truthsayer, turned back to scowl at the Baron. And you have no other knowledge of this Muad'Dib? A madman, the Baron said. But all Fremen are a little mad. Mad? His people scream his name as they leap into battle. The women throw their babies at us and hurl themselves onto our knives to open a wedge for their men to attack us. They have no decency. As bad as that, the Emperor murmured, and his tone of derision did not escape the Baron. Tell me, my dear Baron, have you investigated the southern polar regions of Arrakis? The Baron stared up at the Emperor, shocked by the change of subject. But, well, you know, Your Majesty, the entire region is uninhabitable, open to wind and worm. There's not even any spice in those latitudes. You had no reports from spice lighters that patches of greenery appear there? There have always been such reports. Some were investigated long ago. A few plants were seen. Many thopters were lost. But too costly, Your Majesty. It's a place where men cannot survive for long. So, the Emperor said. He snapped his fingers and a door opened at his left behind the throne. Through the door came 2 Sardaukar, herding a girl child who appeared to be about 4 years old. She wore a black armor, the hood thrown back to reveal the attachments of a stillsuit hanging free at her throat. Her eyes were Fremen blue, staring out of a soft, round face. She appeared completely unafraid, and there was a look to her stare that made the Baron feel uneasy for no reason he could explain. Even the old Bene Gesserit truthsayer drew back as the child passed and made a warding sign in her direction. The old witch obviously was shaken by the child's presence. The Emperor cleared his throat to speak, but the child spoke first. A thin voice with traces of a soft palate lisp, but clear nonetheless. So, here he is, she said. She advanced to the edge of the dais. He doesn't appear much, does he? One frightened old fat man, too weak to support his own flesh, without the help of suspensors. It was such a totally unexpected statement from the mouth of a child that the Baron stared at her, speechless in spite of his anger. Is it a midget? He asked himself. My dear Baron, the Emperor said, become acquainted with the sister of Muad'Dib. The sister? The Baron shifted his attention to the Emperor. I do not understand. I, too, sometimes err on the side of caution, the Emperor said. It has been reported to me that your uninhabited South Polar regions exhibit evidence of human activity. But that's impossible, the Baron protested. The worms! There's sand clear to the... These people seem able to avoid the worms, the Emperor said. The child sat down on the dais beside the throne, dangled her feet over the edge, kicking them. There was such an air of sureness in the way she appraised her surroundings. The Baron stared at the kicking feet, the way they moved the black robe, the wink of sandals beneath the fabric. Unfortunately, the Emperor said, I only sent in 5 troop carriers with a light attack force to pick up prisoners for questioning. We barely got away with 3 prisoners and 1 carrier. Mind you, Baron, my Sardaukar were almost overwhelmed by a force composed mostly of women, children, and old men. This child here was in command of one of the attacking groups. You see, Your Majesty, the Baron said. You see how they are. I allowed myself to be captured, the child said. I did not want to face my brother and have to tell him that his son had been killed. Only a handful of our men got away, the Emperor said. Got away. You hear that? We'd have had them too, the child said, except for the flames. My Sardaukar used the attitudinal jets on their carrier as flamethrowers, the Emperor said. A move of desperation and the only thing that got them away with their 3 prisoners. Mark that, my dear Baron. Sardaukar forced to retreat in confusion from women and children and old men. We must attack in force, the Baron rasped. We must destroy every last vestige of... Silence, the Emperor roared. He pushed himself forward on his throne. Do not abuse my intelligence any longer. You stand there in your foolish innocence and... Majesty, the old truthsayer said. He waved her to silence. You say you don't know about the activity we found, nor the fighting qualities of these superb people. The Emperor lifted himself half off his throne. What do you take me for, Baron? The Baron took 2 backward steps, thinking, it was Raban. He has done this to me. Raban has... And this fake dispute with Duke Leto, the Emperor purred, sitting back into his throne. How beautifully you maneuvered it. Majesty, the Baron pleaded. What are you... Silence! The old Bene Gesserit put a hand on the Emperor's shoulder, leaned close to whisper in his ear. The child, seated on the dais, stopped kicking her feet, said, Make him afraid some more, Shaddam. I shouldn't enjoy this, but I find the pleasure impossible to suppress. Quiet, child, the Emperor said. He leaned forward, put a hand on her head, stared at the Baron. Is it possible, Baron? Would you be as simple-minded as my truthsayer suggests? Do you not recognize this child? Daughter of your ally, Duke Leto? My father was never his ally, the child said. My father is dead, and this old Harkonnen beast has never seen me before. The Baron was reduced to stupefied glaring. When he found his voice, it was only to rasp. Who? I am Alia, daughter of Duke Leto and the Lady Jessica, sister of Duke Paul Muad'Dib, the child said. She pushed herself off the dais, dropped to the floor of the audience chamber. My brother has promised to have your head atop his battle standard, and I think he shall. Be hush, child, the Emperor said, and he sank back into his throne, hand to chin, studying the Baron. I do not take the Emperor's orders. Alia said. She turned, looked up at the old Reverend Mother. She knows. The Emperor glanced up at his truthsayer. What does she mean? That child is an abomination, the old woman said. Her mother deserves a punishment greater than anything in history. Death. It cannot come too quickly for that child or for the one who spawned her. The old woman pointed a finger at Alia. Get out of my mind! TP? The Emperor whispered. He snapped his attention back to Alia. By the Great Mother! You don't understand, Majesty, the old woman said. Not telepathy. She's in my mind. She's like the ones before me, the ones who gave me their memories. She stands in my mind. She cannot be there, but she is. What others? The Emperor demanded. What's this nonsense? The old woman straightened, lowered her pointing hand. I've said too much, but the fact remains that this child who is not a child must be destroyed. Long were we warned against such a one and how to prevent such a birth. But one of our own has betrayed us. You babble, old woman, Alia said. You don't know how it was. You rattle on like a purblind fool. Alia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and held it. The old Reverend Mother groaned and staggered. Alia opened her eyes. That is how it was, she said. A cosmic accident, and you played your part in it. The Reverend Mother held out both hands, palms pushing the air toward Alia. What is happening here? The Emperor demanded. Child, can you truly project your thoughts into the mind of another? That's not how it is at all, Alia said. Unless I'm born as you, I cannot think as you. Kill her, the old woman muttered, and clutched the back of the throne for support. Kill her! The sunken old eyes glared at Alia. Silence, the Emperor said, and he studied Alia. Child, can you communicate with your brother? My brother knows I'm here, Alia said. Can you tell him to surrender the price of your life? Alia smiled up at him with clear innocence. I shall not do that, she said. The Baron stumbled forward to stand beside Alia. Majesty, he pleaded, I knew nothing of... Interrupt me once more, Baron, the Emperor said, and you will lose the powers of interruption forever. He kept his attention focused on Alia, studying her through slitted lids. You will not, Can you read in my mind what I'll do if you disobey me? I've already said I cannot read minds, she said, but one doesn't need telepathy to read your intentions. The Emperor scowled. Child, your cause is hopeless. I have but to rally my forces and reduce this planet to... It's not that simple, Alia said. She looked at the two guildsmen. Ask them. It is not wise to go against my desires, the Emperor said. You should not deny me the least thing. My brother comes now, Alia said. Even an emperor may tremble before Muad'Dib, for he has the strength of righteousness, and heaven smiles upon him. The Emperor surged to his feet. This play has gone far enough. I will take your brother and this planet and grind them to... The room rumbled and shook around them. There came a sudden cascade of sand behind the throne where the hutment was coupled to the Emperor's ship. The abrupt flicker, tightening of skin pressure told of a wide-area shield being activated. I told you, Alia said. My brother comes. The Emperor stood in front of his throne, right hand pressed to right ear, the servo receiver there chattering its report on the situation. The Baron moved 2 steps behind Alia. Sardaukar were leaping to positions at the doors. We will fall back into space and reform, the Emperor said. Baron, my apologies. These madmen are attacking under cover of the storm. We will show them an Emperor's wrath then. He pointed at Alia. Give her body to the storm. As he spoke, Alia fled backward, feigning terror. Let the storm have what it can take, she screamed, and she backed into the Baron's arms. I have her, Majesty, the Baron shouted. Shall I dispatch her now? He hurled her to the floor, clutched his left arm. I'm sorry, grandfather, Aliyah said. You've met the Atreides Gom-Jabbar. She got to her feet, dropped a dark needle from her hand. The Baron fell back. His eyes bulged as he stared at a red slash on his left palm. You! He rolled sideways in his suspensors, a sagging mass of flesh supported inches off the floor, with head lolling and mouth hanging open. These people are insane, the Emperor snarled. Quick, into the ship. We'll purge this planet of every... Something sparkled to his left. A roll of ball lightning bounced away from the wall there, crackled as it touched the metal floor. The smell of burned insulation swept through the cellar leak. The shield! One of the Sardaukar officers shouted. The outer shield is down! His words were drowned in a metallic roaring as the ship wall behind the Emperor trembled and rocked. They've shot the nose off our ship! Someone called. Dust boiled through the room. Under its cover, Aliyah leaped up, ran toward the outer door. The Emperor whirled, motioned his people into an emergency door that swung open in the ship's side behind the throne. He flashed a hand signal to a Sardaukar officer leaping through the dust haze. We will make our stand here, the Emperor ordered. Another crash shook the hutment. The double doors banged open at the far side of the chamber, admitting wind-blown sand and the sound of shouting. A small, black-robed figure could be seen momentarily against the light. Aliyah darting out to find a knife and, as befitted her Fremen training, to kill Harkonnen and Sardaukar wounded. House Sardaukar charged through a green-yellow haze toward the opening, weapons ready, forming an arc there to protect the Emperor's retreat. Save yourself, sir, the Sardaukar officer shouted. Into the ship! But the Emperor stood alone now on his dais, pointing toward the doors. A 40-meter section of the hutment had been blasted away there, and the Selamlik's doors opened now onto drifting sand. A dust cloud hung low over the outside world, blowing from pastel distances. Static lightning crackled from the cloud, and the spark flashes of shields being shorted out by the storm's charge could be seen through the haze. The plain surged with figures in combat, Sardaukar and leaping, gyrating robed men who seemed to come down out of the storm. All this was as a frame for the target of the Emperor's pointing hand. Out of the sand haze came an orderly mass of flashing shapes, great rising curves with crystal spokes that resolved into the gaping mouths of sandworms, a massed wall of them, each with troops of Fremen riding to the attack. They came in a hissing wedge, robes whipping in the wind as they cut through the melee on the plain. Onward, toward the Emperor's hutment they came, while the House Sardaukar stood awed, for the first time in their history, by an onslaught their minds found difficult to accept. But the figures leaping from the worm backs were men, and the blades flashing in that ominous yellow light were a thing the Sardaukar had been trained to face. They threw themselves into combat, and it was man-to-man on the plain of Arakeen, while a picked Sardaukar bodyguard pressed the Emperor back into the ship, sealed the door on him, and prepared to die at the door as part of his shield. In the shock of comparative silence within the ship, the Emperor stared at the wide-eyed faces of his suite, seeing his oldest daughter with a flush of exertion on her cheeks, the old truthsayer standing like a black shadow with her hood pulled about her face, finding at last the faces he sought, the two guildsmen. They wore the guild grey, unadorned, and it seemed to fit the calm they maintained despite the high emotions around them. The taller of the two, though, held a hand to his left eye. As the Emperor watched, someone jostled the guildsman's arm, the hand moved, and the eye was revealed. The man had lost one of his masking contact lenses, and the eye stared out a total blue, so dark as to be almost black. The smaller of the pair elbowed his way a step nearer the Emperor, said, "We cannot know how it will go." And the taller companion, hand restored to eye, added in a cold voice, "But this Muad'Dib cannot know either." The words shocked the Emperor out of his daze. He checked the scorn on his tongue by a visible effort, because it did not take a guild navigator's single-minded focus on the main chance to see the immediate future out on that plain. Were these two so dependent upon their faculty, that they had lost the use of their eyes and their reason, he wondered. Reverend Mother, he said, we must devise a plan. She pulled the hood from her face, met his gaze with an unblinking stare. The look that passed between them carried complete understanding. They had one weapon left, and both knew it. Treachery. Summon Count Fenring from his quarters, the Reverend Mother said. The Padishah Emperor nodded, waved for one of his aides to obey that command.
He was warrior and mystic, ogre and saint, the fox and the innocent, chivalrous, ruthless, less than a god, more than a man. There is no measuring Muad'Dib's motives by ordinary standards. In the moment of his triumph, he saw the death prepared for him, yet he accepted the treachery. Can you say he did this out of a sense of justice? Whose justice, then? Remember, we speak now of the Muad'Dib, who ordered battle drums made from his enemies' skins. The Muad'Dib who denied the conventions of his ducal past with a wave of the hand, saying merely, I am the Kwisatz Haderach. That is reason enough. From Arrakis Awakening by the Princess Irulan.
It was to the Arakeen governor's mansion, the old residency the Atreides had first occupied on Dune, that they had escorted Paul Muad'Dib on the evening of his victory. The building stood as Rabban had restored it, virtually untouched by the fighting, although there had been looting by townspeople. Some of the furnishings in the main hall had been overturned. Paul strode through the main entrance with Gurney Halleck and Stilgar behind. Their escort fanned out into the great hall, straightening the place and clearing an area for Muad'Dib. One squad began investigating that no sly trap had been planted here.
Not the best rolling.
I remembered the day we first came here with your
one
father.
Gurney
Let's
glanced
get one
around
more
at the
since they're
beams and
small.
the high, slitted windows.
I didn't like this place then, and I like it less now. One of our caves would be safer.
Spoken like a true Fremen. Will you reconsider, Muad'Dib?
This place is a symbol. Rabban lived here. By occupying this place, I seal my victory for all to understand. Send men through the building. Touch nothing. Just be certain no Harkonnen people or toys remain.
As you command.
Reluctance was heavy in his tone as Stilgar turned to obey. Communications men hurried into the room with their equipment, began setting up near the massive fireplace. The Fremen guard that augmented the surviving Fedaykin took up stations around the room. There was muttering among them, much darting of suspicious glances. This had been too long a place of the enemy for them to accept their presence in it casually.
Gurney, have an escort bring my mother and Cheney. Does Cheney know yet about our son?
The message was sent, my lord.
Are the makers being taken out of the basin yet?
Yes, my lord. The storm's almost spent.
What's the extent of the storm damage?
In the direct path, on the landing field and across the spice storage yards of the plain, extensive damage. As much from battle as from the storm.
Nothing money won't repair, I presume.
Except for the lives, my lord.
There was a tone of reproach in his voice, as though to say, when did an Atreides worry first about things when people were at stake? But Paul could only focus his attention on the inner eye, and the gaps visible to him in the time wall that still lay across his path. Through each gap, the jihad raged away down the corridors of the future. His side crossed the hall, seeing a chair against the wall. The chair had once stood in the dining hall, and might even have held his own father. At the moment, though, it was only an object to rest his weariness and conceal it from the men. He sat down, pulling his robes around his legs, loosening his stillsuit at the neck.
The Emperor is still holed up in the remains of his ship.
For now, contain him there. Have they found the Harkonnens yet?
They're still examining the dead.
What reply from the ships up there?
Paul jerked his chin toward the ceiling.
No reply yet, my lord.
Paul sighed, resting against the back of his chair.
Bring me a captive Sardaukar. We must send a message to our emperor. It's time to discuss terms.
Yes, my lord.
Gurney turned away, dropped a hand signal to one of the Fedaykin, who took up a close guard position beside Paul.
Gurney, since we've been rejoined, I've yet to hear you produce the proper quotation for the event.
Paul turned, saw Gurney swallow, saw the sudden, grim hardening of the man's jaw.
As you wish, my lord. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son.
Paul closed his eyes, forcing grief out of his mind, letting it wait as he had once waited to mourn his father. Now he gave his thoughts over to this day's accumulated discoveries, the mixed futures and the hidden presence of Alia within his awareness. Of all the uses of time vision, this was the strangest. I have prested the future to place my words where only you can hear them, Alia had said. Even you cannot do that, my brother. I find it an interesting play. And, oh yes, I killed our grandfather, the demented old baron. He had very little pain. Silence. His time sense had seen her withdraw.
Muad'Dib.
Paul opened his eyes to see Stilgar's black, bearded visage above him, the dark eyes glaring with battle light.
You found the body of the old baron.
How could you know? We just found the body in that great pile of metal the Emperor built.
Paul ignored the question, seeing Gurney return accompanied by 2 Fremen who supported a captive Sardaukar.
Here's one of them, my lord.
Gurney signaled to the guard to hold the captive 5 paces in front of Paul. The Sardaukar's eyes, Paul noted, carried a glazed expression of shock. A blue bruise stretched from the bridge of his nose to the corner of his mouth. He was of the blonde, chisel-featured cast, the look that seemed synonymous with rank among the Sardaukar, yet there were no insignia on his torn uniform except the gold buttons with the imperial crest and the tattered braid of his trousers.
I think this one's an officer, my lord.
I am the Duke Paul Atreides. Do you understand that man?
The Sardaukar stared at him, unmoving.
Speak up, or your emperor may die.
The man blinked, swallowed.
Who am I?
You are the Duke Paul Atreides.
He seemed too submissive to Paul, but then the Sardaukar had never been prepared for such happenings as this day. They'd never known anything but victory, which, Paul realized, could be a weakness in itself. He put that thought aside for later consideration in his own training program.
I have a message for you to carry to the emperor.
Paul couched his words in the ancient formula.
I, a duke of a great house, an imperial kinsman, give my word of bond under the convention. If the emperor and his people lay down their arms and come to me here, I will guard their lives with my own.
Paul held up his left hand with a ducal signet for the Sardaukar to see.
I swear it by this.
The man wet his lips with his tongue, glanced at Gurney.
Yes. Who but an Atreides could command the allegiance of Gurney Halleck?
I will carry the message.
Take him to our forward command post and send him in.
Yes, my lord.
Gurney motioned for the guard to obey, led them out. Paul turned back to Stilgar.
Cheney and your mother have arrived. Cheney has asked time to be alone with her grief. The Reverend Mother sought a moment in the weirding room. I know not why.
My mother's sick with longing for a planet she may never see, where water falls from the sky and plants grow so thickly you cannot walk between them.
Water from the sky.
In that instant, Paul saw how Stilgar had been transformed from the Fremen Naib to a creature of the Lisan al-Gaib, a receptacle for awe and obedience. It was a lessening of the man, and Paul felt the ghost wind of the jihad in it. I have seen a friend become a worshipper, he
Give me
thought.
1 second, I'll be Right back.
In a rush of loneliness, Paul glanced around the room, noting how proper and on review his guards had become in his presence. He sensed the subtle, prideful competition among them, each hoping for notice from Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib, from whom all blessings flow, he thought, and it was the bitterest thought of his life. They sense that I must take the throne, he thought, but they cannot know I do it to prevent the jihad.
Raban, too, is dead.
Paul nodded. Guards to the right suddenly snapped aside, standing at attention to open an aisle for Jessica. She wore her black abba and walked with a hint of striding across sand. But Paul noted how this house had restored to her something of what she had once been here, concubine to a ruling duke. Her presence carried some of its old assertiveness. Jessica stopped in front of Paul, looked down at him. She saw his fatigue and how he hid it, but found no compassion for him. It was as though she had been rendered incapable of any emotion for her son. Jessica had entered the great hall, wondering why the place refused to fit itself snugly into her memories. It remained a foreign room, as though she had never walked here with her beloved Leto, never confronted a drunken Duncan Idaho here, never. There should be a word tension directly opposite to Adab, the demanding memory, she thought. There should be a word for memories that deny themselves.
Where is Aaliyah?
Out doing what any good Fremen child should be doing in such times. She's killing enemy wounded and marking their bodies for the water recovery teams.
Paul.
You must understand that she does this out of kindness. Isn't it odd how we misunderstand the hidden unity of kindness and cruelty?
Jessica glared at her son, shocked by the profound change in him. Was it his child's death did this? She wondered.
The men tell strange stories of you, Paul. They say you've all the powers of the legend. Nothing can be hidden from you that you see where others cannot see.
Bene Gesserit should ask about legends.
I've had a hand in whatever you are, but you mustn't expect me to...
How would you like to live billions upon billions of lives? There's a fabric of legends for you. Think of all those experiences, the wisdom they bring. But wisdom tempers love, doesn't it? And it puts a new shape on hate. How can you tell what's ruthless unless you plumb the depths of both cruelty and kindness? You should fear me, Mother. I am the Kwisatz Haderach.
Jessica tried to swallow in a dry throat.
Once you denied to me that you were the Kwisatz Haderach.
I can deny nothing anymore.
Paul looked up into her eyes.
The Emperor and his people come now. They will be announced any moment. Stand beside me. I wish a clear view of them. My future bride will be among them.
Paul, don't make the mistake your father made.
She's a princess. She's my key to the throne, and that's all she'll ever be. Mistake? You think because I'm what you made me that I cannot feel the need for revenge?
Even on the innocent.
Jessica thought, he must not make the mistakes I made.
There are no innocent anymore.
Tell that to Cheney.
Jessica gestured toward the passage from the rear of the residency. Cheney entered the great hall there, walking between the Fremen guards as though unaware of them. Her hood and stillsuit cap were thrown back, face mask fastened aside. She walked with a fragile uncertainty as she crossed the room to stand beside Jessica. Paul saw the marks of tears on her cheeks. She gives water to the dead. He felt a pang of grief strike through him, but it was as though he could only feel this thing through Cheney's presence.
He is dead, beloved. Our son is dead.
Holding himself under stiff control, Paul got to his feet. He reached out, touched Cheney's cheek, feeling the dampness of her tears.
He cannot be replaced, but there will be other sons. It is Usul who promises this.
Gently he moved her aside, gestured to Stilgar.
Muad'Dib.
They come from the ship, the Emperor and his people. I will stand here, assemble the captives in an open space in the center of the room. They will be kept at a distance of 10 meters from me unless I command otherwise.
As you command, Muad'Dib.
As Stilgar turned to obey, Paul heard the awed muttering of Fremen guards. You see, he knew. No one told him, but he knew. The Emperor's entourage could be heard approaching now, his Sardaukar humming one of their marching tunes to keep up their spirits. There came a murmur of voices at the entrance, and Gurney Halleck passed through the guard, crossed to confer with Stilgar, then moved to Paul's side, a strange look in his eyes. Will I lose Gurney too? Paul wondered. The way I lost Stilgar? Losing a friend to gain a creature.
They have no throwing weapons. I've made sure of that myself.
He glanced around the room, seeing Paul's preparations.
Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen is with them. Shall I cut him out?
Leave him.
There's some guild people, too, demanding special privileges, threatening an embargo against Arrakis. I told them I'd give you their message.
Let them threaten.
Paul, he's talking about the guild.
I'll pull their fangs presently.
And he thought then about the guild, the force that had specialized for so long that it had become a parasite, unable to exist independently of the life upon which it fed. They had never dared grasp the sword, and now they could not grasp it. They might have taken Arrakis when they realized the error of specializing on a melange awareness spectrum narcotic for their navigators. They could have done this, lived their glorious day, and died. Instead, they'd existed from moment to moment, hoping the seas in which they swam might produce a new host when the old one died. The guild navigator, gifted with limited prescience, had made the fatal decision. They'd chosen always the clear, safe course that leads ever downward into stagnation. Let them look closely at their new host, Paul thought.
There's also a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother who says she's a friend of your mother.
My mother has no Bene Gesserit friends.
Again, Gurney glanced around the great hall, then bent close to Paul's ear.
Thufir Howit's with him, my lord. I had no chance to see him alone, but he used our old hand signs to say he's been working with the Harkonnens. Thought you were dead. Says he's to be left among them.
You left Thufir among those...
He wanted it, and I thought it best. If there's something wrong, he's where we can control him. If not, we've an ear on the other side.
Paul thought then of prescient glimpses into the possibilities of this moment, and one timeline where Thufir carried a poisoned needle which the Emperor commanded he use against this upstart duke. The entrance guards stepped aside, formed a short corridor of lances. There came a murmurous swish of garments, feet rasping the sand that had drifted into the residency. The Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV led his people into the hall. His Burseg helmet had been lost, and the red hair stood out in disarray. His uniform's left sleeve had been ripped along the inner seam. He was beltless and without weapons, but his presence moved with him like a force shield bubble that kept his immediate area open. A Fremen lance dropped across his path, stopped him where Paul had ordered. The others bunched up behind, a montage of color, of shuffling, and of staring faces. Paul swept his gaze across the group, saw women who hid signs of weeping, saw the lackeys who had come to enjoy grandstand seats at a Sardaukar victory and now stood choked to silence by defeat. Paul saw the bird-bright eyes of the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, glaring beneath her black hood, and beside her, the narrow furtiveness of Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. There's a face time betrayed to me, Paul thought. He looked beyond Feyd-Rautha then, attracted by a movement, seeing there a narrow, weaselish face he'd never before encountered, not in time or out of it. It was a face he felt he should know, and the feeling carried with it a marker of fear. Why should I fear that man? He wondered. He leaned toward his mother, whispered,
That man to the left of the Reverend Mother, the evil-looking one. Who is that?
Jessica looked, recognizing the face from her duke's dossiers.
Count Fenring, the one who was here immediately before us. A genetic eunuch and a killer.
The Emperor's errand boy, Paul thought. And the thought was a shock crashing across his consciousness because he had seen the Emperor in uncounted associations spread through the possible futures, but never once had Count Fenring appeared within those prescient visions. It occurred to Paul then that he had seen his own dead body along countless reaches of a time web, but never once had he seen his moment of death. Have I been denied a glimpse of this man because he is the one who kills me? Paul wondered. The thought sent a pang of foreboding through him. He forced his attention away from Fenring, looked now at the remnants of Sardaukar men and officers, the bitterness on their faces and the desperation. Here and there among them, faces caught Paul's attention briefly. Sardaukar officers measuring the preparations within this room, planning and scheming yet for a way to turn defeat into victory. Paul's attention came at last to a tall, blonde woman, green-eyed, a face of patrician beauty, classic in its hauteur, untouched by tears, completely undefeated. Without being told it, Paul knew her. Princess Royal, Bene Gesserit trained, a face that time vision had shown him in many aspects. Irulan. There's my key, he thought. Then he saw movement in the clustered people. A face and figure emerged. Thufir Howard, the seamed old features with darkly stained lips, the hunched shoulders, the look of fragile age about him.
There's Thufir Howard. Let him stand free, Gurney.
My lord.
Let him stand free.
Gurney nodded. Howard shambled forward as a Fremen lance was lifted and replaced behind him. The roomy eyes peered at Paul, measuring, seeking. Paul stepped forward one pace, sensed the tense, waiting movement of the Emperor and his people. Howard's gaze stabbed past Paul.
Lady Jessica, I but learned this day how I've wronged you in my thoughts. You needn't forgive.
Paul waited, but his mother remained silent.
Thufir, old friend, as you can see, my back is toward no door.
The universe is full of doors.
Am I my father's son?
More like your grandfather's. You his manner and the look of him in your eyes.
Yet I'm my father's son, for I say to you, Thufir, that in payment for your years of service to my family, you may now ask anything you wish of me. Anything at all. Do you need my life now, Thufir? It is yours.
Paul stepped forward a pace, hands at his side, seeing the look of awareness grow in Howard's eyes. He realizes that I know of the treachery, Paul thought. Paul pitched his voice to carry in a half-whisper for Howard's ears alone.
I mean this, Thufir. If you're to strike me, do it now.
I but wanted to stand before you once more, my Duke.
Paul became aware for the first time of the effort the old man exerted to keep from falling. Paul reached out, supported Howard by the shoulders, feeling the muscle tremors beneath his hands.
Is there pain, old friend?
There is pain, my Duke. But the pleasure is greater.
He half turned in Paul's arms, extended his left hand palm up toward the Emperor, exposing the tiny needle cupped against the fingers.
See, Majesty. See your traitor's needle. Did you think that I, who given my life to service of the Atreides, would give them less now?
Paul staggered as the old man sagged in his arms, felt the death there, the utter flaccidity. Gently, Paul lowered Howard to the floor, straightened and signed for guardsmen to carry the body away. Silence held the hall while his command was obeyed. A look of deadly waiting held the Emperor's face now. Eyes that had never admitted fear, admitted it at last.
Majesty.
Paul noted the jerk of surprised attention in the tall Princess Royal. The words had been uttered with a Bene Gesserit-controlled atonals, carrying in it every shade of contempt and scorn that Paul could put there. Bene Gesserit trained indeed, Paul thought.
Perhaps my respected kinsman believes he has things all his own way now. Nothing could be more remote from fact. You have violated the convention, used atomics against...
I used atomics against a natural feature of the desert. It was in my way, and I was in a hurry to get to you, Majesty, to ask your explanation for some of your strange activities.
There's a massed armada of the great houses in space over Arrakis right now. I've but to say the word and they...
Oh, yes. I almost forgot about them.
Paul searched through the Emperor's suite until he saw the faces of the two guildsmen, spoke aside to Gurney.
Are those the guild agents, Gurney? The two fat ones dressed in grey over there?
Yes, my lord.
You two, get out of there immediately and dispatch messages that will get that fleet on its way home. After this, you'll ask my permission before...
The guild doesn't take your orders.
The taller of the two had spoken. He and his companion pushed through to the barrier lances, which were raised at a nod from Paul. The two men stepped out, and the taller leveled an arm at Paul.
You may very well be under embargo for your...
If I hear any more nonsense from either of you, I'll give the order that'll destroy all spice production on Arrakis forever.
Are you mad?
The tall guildsman fell back half a step.
You grant that I have the power to do this thing, then?
The guildsman seemed to stare into space for a moment.
Yes, you could do it, but you must not.
Ah, guild navigators, both of you, eh?
Yes. You would blind yourself, too, and condemn us all to slow death. Have you any idea what it means to be deprived of the spice liquor once you're addicted?
The eye that looks ahead to the safe course is closed forever. The guild is crippled. Humans become little isolated clusters on their isolated planets. You know, I might do this thing out of pure spite, or out of ennui.
Let us talk this over privately. I'm sure we can come to some compromise that is...
Send the message to your people over Arrakis. I grow tired of this argument. If that fleet over us doesn't leave soon, there'll be no need for us to talk.
Paul nodded toward his communications men at the side of the hall.
You may use our equipment.
First, we must discuss this. We cannot just do it.
The power to destroy a thing is the absolute control over it. You've agreed I have that power. We are not here to discuss or to negotiate or to compromise. You will obey my orders or suffer the immediate consequences.
He means it.
The shorter guildsman spoke, and Paul saw the fear grip them. Slowly the two crossed to the Fremen communications equipment.
Will they obey? They have a narrow vision of time. They can see ahead to a blank wall, marking the consequences of disobedience. Every guild navigator on every ship over us can look ahead to that same wall. They'll obey.
Paul turned back to look at the Emperor.
When they permitted you to mount your father's throne, it was only on the assurance that you'd keep the spice flowing. You failed them, Majesty. Do you know the consequences?
Nobody permitted me.
Stop playing the fool! The guild is like a village beside a river. They need the water, but can only dip out what they require. They cannot dam the river and control it, because that focuses attention on what they take. It brings down eventual destruction. The spice flow, that's their river. And I have built a dam. But my dam is such that you cannot destroy it without destroying the river.
The Emperor brushed a hand through his red hair, glanced at the backs of the two guildsmen.
Even your Bene Gesserit truthsayer is trembling. There are other poisons the Reverend Mothers can use for their tricks, but once they've used the spice liquor, the others no longer work.
The old woman pulled her shapeless black robes around her, pressed forward out of the crowd to stand at the barrier lances.
Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mahayam. It has been a long time since Kaladin, hasn't it?
She looked past him at his mother.
Well, Jessica, I see that your son is indeed the one. For that you can be forgiven even the abomination of your daughter.
You've never had the right or cause to forgive my mother anything.
The old woman locked eyes with him.
Try your tricks on me, old witch. Where's your Gom Jabbar? Try looking into that place where you dare not look. You'll find me there staring out at you.
The old woman dropped her gaze.
Have you nothing to say?
I welcomed you to the ranks of humans. Don't besmirch that.
Observe her, comrades. This is a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, patient in a patient cause. She could wait with her sisters, 90 generations for the proper combination of genes and environments to produce the one person their schemes required. Observe her. She knows now that the 90 generations have produced that person. Here I stand. But I will never do her bidding.
Jessica, silence him! Silence him yourself.
Paul glared at the old woman.
For your part in all this, I could gladly have you strangled. You couldn't prevent it. But I think it better punishment that you live out your years, never able to touch me or bend me to a single thing your scheming desires.
Jessica, what have you done?
I'll give you only one thing. You saw part of what the race needs, but how poorly you saw it. You think to control human breeding and intermix a select few according to your master plan. How little you understand of what—
You mustn't speak of these things!
Silence!
The word seemed to take substance as it twisted through the air between them under Paul's control. The old woman reeled back into the arms of those behind her, face blank with shock at the power with which he had seized her psyche.
Jessica! Jessica!
I remember your Gom Jabbar. You remember mine. I can kill you with a word.
The Fremen around the hall glanced knowingly at each other. Did the legend not say, "And his word shall carry death eternal to those who stand against righteousness"? Paul turned his attention to the tall Princess Royal, standing beside her Emperor father. Keeping his eyes focused on her, he spoke.
Majesty, we both know the way out of our difficulty.
The Emperor glanced at his daughter. Back to Paul.
You dare? You? An adventurer without family? A nobody from—
You've already admitted who I am. Royal kinsman, you said. Let's stop this nonsense.
I am your ruler.
Paul glanced at the guildsmen standing now at the communications equipment and facing him. One of them nodded.
I could force it.
You will not dare!
Paul merely stared at him. The Princess Royal put a hand on her father's arm.
Father.
Don't try your tricks on me. You don't need to do this, daughter. We've other resources that—
But here's a man fit to be your son.
The old Reverend Mother, her composure regained, forced her way to the Emperor's side, leaned close to his ear and whispered.
She pleads your case.
Paul continued to look at the golden-haired princess.
That's Irulan, the oldest, isn't it?
Yes.
Cheney moved up on Paul's other side.
Do you wish me to leave, Muad'Dib?
Leave? You'll never again leave my side.
There's nothing binding between us.
Paul looked down at her for a silent moment.
Speak only truth with me, my Sihaya.
As she started to reply, he silenced her with a finger to her lips.
That which binds us cannot be loosed. Now, watch these matters closely, for I wish to see this room later through your wisdom.
The Emperor and his truthsayer were carrying on a heated, low-voiced argument. Paul spoke to his mother.
She reminds him that it's part of their agreement to place a Bene Gesserit on the throne, and Irulan is the one they've groomed for it.
Was that their plan?
Isn't it obvious?
I see the signs. My question was meant to remind you that you should not try to teach me those matters in which I instructed you.
Paul glanced at her, caught a cold smile on her lips. Gurney Halleck leaned between them.
I remind you, my lord, that there's a Harkonnen in that bunch.
He nodded toward the dark-haired Fade Routher pressed against a barrier lance on the left.
The one with the squinting eyes there on the left. As evil a face as I ever saw. You promised me once that—
Thank you, Gurney.
It's the Nah Baron. Baron now that the old man's dead. He'll do for what I've been—
Can you take him, Gurney?
My lord jests.
That argument between the Emperor and his witch has gone on long enough, don't you think, Mother?
Indeed.
Majesty, is there a Harkonnen among you?
Royal disdain revealed itself in the way the Emperor turned to look at Paul.
I believe my entourage has been placed under the protection of your ducal word?
My question was for information only. I wish to know if a Harkonnen is officially a part of your entourage, or if a Harkonnen is merely hiding behind a technicality out of cowardice.
The Emperor's smile was calculating.
Anyone accepted into the Imperial Company is a member of my entourage.
You have the word of a duke, but Muad'Dib is another matter. He may not recognize your definition of what constitutes an entourage. My friend Gurney Halleck wishes to kill a Harkonnen. If he...
Conley! Feyd-Rautha pressed against the barrier lance.
Your father named this vendetta, Atreides. You call me coward while you hide among your women and offer to send a lackey against me.
The old truthsayer whispered something fiercely into the Emperor's ear, but he pushed her aside.
Conley, is it? There are strict rules for Conley.
Paul, put a stop to this.
My lord, you promised me my day against the Harkonnens.
You've had your day against them.
Paul felt a harlequin abandon take over his emotions. He slipped his robe and hood from his shoulders, handed them to his mother with his belt and crysknife, began unstrapping his stillsuit. He sensed now that the universe focused on this moment.
There's no need for this. There are easier ways, Paul.
Paul stepped out of his stillsuit, slipped the crysknife from its sheath in his mother's hand.
I know. Poison, an assassin, all the old familiar ways.
You promised me a Harkonnen.
Paul marked the rage in the man's face, the way the ink-vine scar stood out dark and rich.
You owe it to me, my lord.
Have you suffered more from them than I?
My sister, my years in the slave pits.
My father, my good friends and companions, Thufir Hawat and Duncan Idaho. My years as a fugitive without rank or succor. And one more thing. It is now Conley, and you know as well as I the rules that must prevail.
Halleck's shoulders sagged.
My lord, if that swine... He's no more than a beast you'd spurn with your foot and discard the shoe because it had been contaminated. Call in an executioner if you must, or let me do it, but don't offer yourself to...
Muad'Dib need not do this thing.
Paul glanced at Cheney, saw the fear for him in her eyes.
But the Duke Paul must.
This is a Harkonnen animal.
Paul hesitated on the point of revealing his own Harkonnen ancestry, stopped at a sharp look from his mother.
But this being has human shape, Gurney, and deserves human doubt.
He so much as...
Please stand aside.
Paul hefted the crysknife, pushed Gurney gently aside. Jessica touched Gurney's arm.
He's like his grandfather in this mood. Don't distract him. It's the only thing you can do for him now.
And she thought, Great Mother, what irony. The Emperor was studying Feyd-Rautha, seeing the heavy shoulders, the thick muscles. He turned to look at Paul, a stringy whipcord of a youth, not as desiccated as the Arrakeen natives, but with ribs there to count, and sunken in the flanks so that the ripple and gather of muscles could be followed under the skin. Jessica leaned close to Paul and pitched her voice for his ears alone.
One thing, son. Sometimes a dangerous person is prepared by the Bene Gesserit. A word implanted into the deepest recesses by the old pleasure-pain methods. The word sound most frequently used is Uroshnor. If this one's been prepared, as I strongly suspect, that word uttered in his ear will render his muscles flaccid and...
I want no special advantage for this one. Step back out of my way.
Gurney spoke to Jessica.
Why is he doing this? Does he think to get himself killed and achieve martyrdom? This Fremen religious prattle, is that what clouds his reason?
Jessica hid her face in her hands, realizing that she did not know fully why Paul took this course. She could feel death in the room and knew that the changed Paul was capable of such a thing as Gurney suggested. Every talent within her focused on the need to protect her son, but there was nothing she could do.
Is it this religious prattle?
Be silent and pray.
The Emperor's face was touched by an abrupt smile.
If Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, of my entourage, so wishes, I relieve him of all restraint and give him freedom to choose his own course in this.
The Emperor waved a hand toward Paul's Fedaykin guards.
One of your rabble has my belt and short blade. If Feyd-Rautha wishes it, he may meet you with my blade in his hand.
I wish it.
Paul saw the elation on the man's face. He's overconfident, Paul thought. There's a natural advantage I can accept.
Get the Emperor's blade.
Paul watched as his command was obeyed.
Put it on the floor there.
He indicated a place with his foot.
Clear the Imperial rabble back against the wall and let the Harkonnen stand clear.
A flurry of robes, scraping of feet, low-voiced commands and protests accompanied obedience to Paul's command. The guildsmen remained standing near the communications equipment. They frowned at Paul in obvious indecision. They're accustomed to seeing the future, Paul thought. In this place and time, they're blind, even as I am. And he sampled the time winds, sensing the turmoil, the storm nexus that now focused on this moment place. Even the faint gaps were closed now. Here was the unborn jihad he knew. Here was the race consciousness that he had known once as his own terrible purpose. Here was reason enough for a Kwisatz Haderach or a Lisan al-Gaib, or even the halting schemes of the Bene Gesserit. The race of humans had felt its own dormancy, sensed itself grown stale, and knew now only the need to experience turmoil, in which the genes would mingle and the strong new mystery would survive. All humans were alive as an unconscious single organism in this moment, experiencing a kind of sexual heat that could override any barrier. And Paul saw how futile were any efforts of his to change any smallest bit of this. He had thought to oppose the jihad within himself, but the jihad would be. His legions would rage out from Arrakis even without him. They needed only the legend he already had become. He had shown them the way, given them mastery, even over the guild which must have the spice to exist. A sense of failure pervaded him, and he saw through it that Phaedra Harkonnen had slipped out of the torn uniform, stripped down to a fighting girdle with a male core. This is the climax, Paul thought. From here the future will open, the clouds part onto a kind of glory, and if I die here, they'll say I sacrificed myself that my spirit might lead them, and if I live, they'll say nothing can oppose Muad'Dib.
Is the Atreides ready?
Phaedra used the words of the ancient Khanli ritual. Paul chose to answer him in the Fremen way.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
He pointed to the Emperor's blade on the floor, indicating that Phaedra should advance and take it. Keeping his attention on Paul, Phaedra picked up the knife, balancing it a moment in his hand to get the feel of it. Excitement kindled in him. This was a fight he had dreamed about, man against man, skill against skill, with no shields intervening. He could see a way to power opening before him because the Emperor surely would reward whoever killed this troublesome duke. The reward might even be that haughty daughter and a share of the throne. And this yokel duke, this back-world adventurer, could not possibly be a match for a Harkonnen, trained in every device and every treachery by 1,000 arena combats. And the yokel had no way of knowing he faced more weapons than a knife here. Let's see if you're proof against poison, Phaedra thought. He saluted Paul with the Emperor's blade.
Meet your death, fool.
Shall we fight, cousin?
Paul cat-footed forward, eyes on the waiting blade, his body crouched low, with his own milk-white crysknife pointing out as though an extension of his arm. They circled each other, bare feet grating on the floor, watching with eyes intent for the slightest opening.
How beautifully you dance.
He's a talker, Paul thought. There's another weakness. He grows uneasy in the face of silence.
Have you been shriven?
Still, Paul circled in silence. And the old Reverend Mother, watching the fight from the press of the Emperor's suite, felt herself trembling. The Atreides youth had called the Harkonnen cousin. It could only mean he knew the ancestry they shared, easy to understand because he was the Kwisatz Haderach. But the words forced her to focus on the only thing that mattered to her here. This could be a major catastrophe for the Bene Gesserit breeding scheme. She had seen something of what Paul had seen here, that Phaedra might kill but not be victorious. Another thought, though, almost overwhelmed her. Two end products of this long and costly program faced each other in a fight to the death that might easily claim both of them. If both died here, that would leave only Feyd-Rautha's bastard daughter, still a baby, an unknown, an unmeasured factor, and Aliyah, the abomination.
Perhaps you have only pagan rites here. Would you like the Emperor's truthsayer to prepare your spirit for its journey?
Paul smiled, circling to the right, alert, his black thoughts suppressed by the needs of the moment. Feyd-Rautha leaped, feinting with right hand, but with the knife shifted in a blur to his left hand. Paul dodged easily, noting the shield-conditioned hesitation in Feyd-Rautha's thrust. Still, it was not as great a shield conditioning as some Paul had seen, and he sensed that Feyd-Rautha had fought before against unshielded foes.
Does an Atreides run or stand and fight?
Paul resumed his silent circling. Idaho's words came back to him, the words of training for the long-ago practice floor on Caladan. Use the first moments in study. You may miss many an opportunity for quick victory this way, but the moments of study are insurance of success. Take your time and be sure.
Perhaps you think this dance prolongs your life a few moments. Well and good.
He stopped the circling, straightened. Paul had seen enough for a first approximation. Feyd-Rautha led to the left side, presenting the right hip as though the mailed fighting girdle could protect his entire side. It was the action of a man trained to the shield, and with a knife in both hands. Or, and Paul hesitated. The girdle was more than it seemed. The Harkonnen appeared too confident against a man who, this day, led the forces of victory against Sardaukar legions. Feyd-Rautha noted the hesitation.
Why prolong the inevitable? You but keep me from exercising my rights over this ball of dirt.
If it's a flip guard, Paul thought, it's a cunning one. The girdle shows no signs of tampering.
Why don't you speak?
Paul resumed his probing circle, allowing himself a cold smile at the tone of unease in Feyd-Rautha's voice, evidence that the pressure of silence was building.
You smile, eh?
And he leaped in mid-sentence. Expecting the slight hesitation, Paul almost failed to evade the down-flash of blade, felt its tip scratch his left arm. He silenced the sudden pain there, his mind flooded with realization that the earlier hesitation had been a trick, an overfeint. Here was more of an opponent than he had expected. There would be tricks within tricks within tricks.
Your own Thufir Hawat taught me some of my skills. He gave me first blood. Too bad the old fool didn't live to see it.
And Paul recalled that Idaho had once said, expect only what happens in the fight. That way you'll never be surprised. Again the two circled each other, crouched, cautious. Paul saw the return of elation to his opponent, wondered at it. Did a scratch signify that much to the man? Unless there were poison on the blade. But how could there be? His own men had handled the weapon, snooped it before passing it. They were too well trained to miss an obvious thing like that.
That woman you were talking to over there, the little one, is she something special to you? A pet, perhaps? Will she deserve my special attentions?
Paul remained silent, probing with his inner senses, examining the blood from the wound, finding a trace of soporific from the Emperor's blade. He realigned his own metabolism to match this threat, and changed the molecules of the soporific, but he felt a thrill of doubt. They'd been prepared with soporific on a blade. A soporific. Nothing to alert a poison snooper, but strong enough to slow the muscles it touched. His enemies had their own plans within plans, their own stacked treacheries. Again Feyd-Rautha leaped, stabbing. Paul, the smile frozen on his face, fainted with slowness, as though inhibited by the drug, and at the last instant dodged to meet the down-flashing arm on the crysknife's point. Feyd-Rautha ducked sideways and was out and away, his blade shifted to his left hand, and a measure of him that only a slight paleness of jaw betrayed the acid pain where Paul had cut him. Let him know his own moment of doubt, Paul thought. Let him suspect poison.
Treachery! He's poisoned me. I do feel poison in my arm.
Only a little acid to counter the soporific on the Emperor's blade.
Feyd-Rautha matched Paul's cold smile, lifted blade in left hand for a mock salute. His eyes glared rage behind the knife. Paul shifted his crysknife to his left hand, matching his opponent. Again they circled, probing.
Hey, Pat.
Feyd-Rautha began closing the space between
Hope
them,
you're doing
edging
well.
in, knife held high, anger showing
this
itself
now.
in squint of eye and set of jaw. He feinted right and under, and they were pressed against each other, knife hands gripped, straining. Paul, cautious of Feyd-Rautha's right hip, where he suspected a poison flip dart, forced the turn to the right. He almost failed to see the needle point flick out beneath the belt line. A shift and a giving in Feyd-Rautha's motion warned him the tiny point missed Paul's flesh by the barest fraction. On the left hip. Treachery within treachery within treachery, Paul reminded himself. Using Bene Gesserit-trained muscles, he sagged to catch a reflex in Feyd-Rautha, but the necessity of avoiding the tiny point jutting from his opponent's hip threw Paul off just enough that he missed his footing and found himself thrown hard to the floor, Feyd-Rautha on top.
You see it there on my hip? You're death, fool.
Feyd-Rautha began twisting himself around, forcing the poisoned needle closer and closer.
It'll stop your muscles and my knife will finish you. There'll be never a trace left to detect.
Paul strained, hearing the silent screams in his mind, his cell-stamped ancestors demanding that he use the secret word to slow Feyd-Rautha, to save himself.
I will not say it.
Feyd-Rautha gaped at him, caught in the merest fraction of hesitation. It was enough for Paul to find the weakness of balance in one of his opponent's leg muscles, and their positions were reversed. Feyd-Rautha lay partly underneath, with right hip high, unable to turn because of the tiny needle point caught against the floor beneath him. Paul twisted his left hand free, aided by the lubrication of blood from his arm, thrust once hard up underneath Feyd-Rautha's jaw. The point slid home into the brain. Feyd-Rautha jerked and sagged back, still held partly on his side by the needle embedded in the floor. Breathing deeply to restore his calm, Paul pushed himself away and got to his feet. He stood over the body, knife in hand, raised his eyes with deliberate slowness to look across the room at the Emperor.
Majesty, your force is reduced by one more. Shall we now shed sham and pretense? Shall we now discuss what must be? Your daughter wed to me, and the way open for an Atreides to sit on the throne.
The Emperor turned, looked at Count Fenring. The Count met his stare, grey eyes against green. A thought lay there clearly between them, their association so long that understanding could be achieved with a glance. Kill this upstart for me, the Emperor was saying. The Atreides is young and resourceful, yes, but he is also tired from long effort, and he'd be no match for you anyway. Call him out now. You know the way of it. Kill him. Slowly, Fenring moved his head, a prolonged turning until he faced Paul.
Do it!
The Count focused on Paul, seeing with eyes his Lady Margot had trained in the Bene Gesserit way, aware of the mystery and hidden grandeur about this Atreides youth. I could kill him, Fenring thought, and he knew this for a truth. Something in his own secretive depths stayed the Count then, and he glimpsed briefly, inadequately, the advantage he held over Paul, a way of hiding from the youth, a furtiveness of person and motives that no eye could penetrate. Paul, aware of some of this from the way the time nexus boiled, understood at last why he had never seen Fenring along the webs of prescience. Fenring was one of the might-have beens, an almost Kwisatz Haderach, crippled by a flaw in the genetic pattern, a eunuch, his talent concentrated into furtiveness and inner seclusion. A deep compassion for the Count flowed through Paul, the first sense of brotherhood he'd ever experienced. Fenring read Paul's emotion.
Majesty, I must refuse.
Rage overcame Shaddam IV. He took 2 short steps through the entourage, cuffed Fenring viciously across the jaw. A dark flush spread up and over the Count's face. He looked directly at the Emperor, spoke with deliberate lack of emphasis.
We have been friends, Majesty. What I do now is out of friendship, I shall forget that you struck me.
We were speaking of the throne, Majesty.
The Emperor whirled, glared at Paul.
I sit on the throne.
You shall have a throne on Seleucus Secundus.
I put down my arms and came here on your word of bond. You dare threaten.
Your person is safe in my presence, and Atreides promised it. Muad'Dib, however, sentences you to your prison planet. But have no fear, Majesty. I will ease the harshness of the place with all the powers at my disposal. It shall become a garden world, full of gentle things.
As the hidden import of Paul's words grew in the Emperor's mind, he glared across the room at Paul.
Now we see true motives.
Indeed.
And what of Arrakis? Another garden world full of gentle things?
The Fremen have the word of Muad'Dib. There will be flowing water here, open to the sky, and green oases rich with good things. But we have the spice to think of too. Thus, there will always be desert on Arrakis, and fierce winds, and trials to toughen a man. We Fremen have a saying. God created Arrakis to train the faithful. One cannot go against the word of God.
The old truth-sayer, the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim, had her own view of the hidden meaning in Paul's words now. She glimpsed the jihad.
You cannot loose these people upon the universe.
You will think back to the gentle ways of the Sardaukar.
You cannot.
You're a truth-sayer. Review your words.
Paul glanced at the Princess Royal, back to the Emperor.
Best be done quickly, Majesty.
The Emperor turned a stricken look upon his daughter. She touched his arm, spoke soothingly.
For this I was trained, Father.
The Emperor took a deep breath.
You cannot stay this thing.
The Emperor straightened, standing stiffly with a look of remembered dignity.
Who will negotiate for you, kinsman?
Paul turned, saw his mother, her eyes heavy-lidded, standing with Cheney in a squad of Fedaykin guards. He crossed to them, stood looking down at Cheney.
I know the reasons. If it must be, Usul.
Paul, hearing the secret tears in her voice, touched her cheek.
My Sihaya need fear nothing. Ever.
He dropped his arm, faced his mother.
You will negotiate for me, Mother, with Cheney by your side. She has wisdom and sharp eyes, and it is wisely said that no one bargains tougher than a Fremen. She will be looking through the eyes of a love for me and with the thought of her sons to be, what they will need. Listen to her.
Jessica sensed the harsh calculation in her son, put down a shudder.
What are your instructions?
The Emperor's entire term company holdings is dowry.
Entire?
He is to be stripped. I want an earldom and term directorship for Gurney Halleck, and him in the Fife of Caledon. There will be titles and attendant power for every surviving Atreides man, not excepting the lowliest trooper.
What of the Fremen?
The Fremen are mine. What they receive shall be dispensed by Muad'Dib. It'll begin with Stilgar as governor on Arrakis, but that can wait.
And for me?
Is there something you wish?
Perhaps Caledon. I'm not certain. I've become too much the Fremen and the Reverend Mother. I need a time of peace and stillness in which to think.
That you shall have, and anything else that Gurney or I can give you.
Jessica nodded, feeling suddenly old and tired. She looked at Cheney.
And for the royal concubine?
No title for me. Nothing. I beg of you.
Paul stared down into her eyes, remembering her
Well,
suddenly as she
good
had
out
stood
there.
once with little Leto in her arms. Their child, now dead in this violence.
I swear to you now that you'll need no title. That woman over there will be my wife and you but a concubine, because this is a political thing, and we must weld peace out of this moment. Enlist the great houses of the Landsraad. We must obey the forms. Yet that princess shall have no more of me than my name. No child of mine, nor touch, nor softness of glance, nor instant of desire.
So you say now.
Cheney glanced across the room at the tall princess.
Do you know so little of my son? See that princess standing there, so haughty and confident? They say she has pretensions of a literary nature, Let us hope she finds solace in such things. She'll have little else. Think on it, Janie. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Janie, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune, an audio Renaissance production with Tor Books. This program was executive produced by Laura Wilson, produced by Garrett Scott, and directed by Garrett Scott and Kevin Thompson. Text copyright 1965 by Frank Herbert. Audio production copyright 2007 by Audio Renaissance, a division of Holtzbrink Publishers LLC. All rights reserved.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Here's a recommended preview based on your listening. To listen to the full title, you can buy it in your player.
Just got done. That had to be the boss. Hey USA, how you doing? Sorry I missed you. I was distracted. Now I gotta put something else on, don't I? At least something for tonight. Oh, nice. That sounds good as hell, bro.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit
I can't remember the name of it.
www.librivox.org. Today's reading
Gotta
by
be
Alex
today at
Foster.
this one.
www.alexfoster.me.uk. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Chapter 1. The Strange Man's Arrival. The stranger came early in February, one wintry day, through a biting wind and a driving snow, the last snowfall of the year. Over the down, walking from Bramblehurst railway station and carrying a little black portmanteau in his thickly gloved hand. He was wrapped up from head to foot, and the brim of his soft felt hat hid every inch of his face but the shiny tip of his nose. The snow had piled itself against his shoulders and chest, and added a white crest to the burden he carried. He staggered into the coach and horses, more dead than alive, and flung his portmanteau down. "A fire!" he cried. "In the name of human charity, a room and a fire!" He stamped and shook the snow from off himself in the bar, and followed Mrs. Hall into her guest parlour to strike his bargain. And with that much introduction, that and a couple of sovereigns flung upon the table, he took up his quarters in the inn. Mrs. Hall lit the fire and left him there, while she went to prepare him a meal with her own hands. A guest to stop at Iping in the winter-time was an unheard-of piece of luck, let alone a guest who was no haggler, and she resolved to show herself worthy of her good fortune. As soon as the bacon was well under way, and Milly, her lymphatic aid, had been brisked up a bit by a few deftly chosen expressions of contempt, she carried the cloth, plates, and glasses into the parlour, and began to lay them with the utmost éclat. Although the fire was burning up briskly, she was surprised to see that her visitor still wore his hat and coat, standing with his back to her, and staring out of the window at the falling snow in the yard. His gloved hands were clasped behind him, and he seemed to be lost in thought. She noticed that the melting snows that still sprinkled his shoulders dripped upon her carpet. "Can I take your hat and coat, sir?" she said, "and give them a good dry in the kitchen?" "No," he said without
Any
turning.
type meal you make with deer meat.
She was not sure she had heard him, and was about to repeat her question. He turned his head and looked at her over his shoulder. "I prefer to keep them on," he said with emphasis, and she noticed that he wore big blue spectacles with sidelights, and had a bush side whisker over his coat collar that completely hid his cheeks and face. "Very well, sir," she said. "As you like. In a bit the room will be warmer." He made no answer, and had turned his face away from her again, and Mrs. Hall, feeling that her conversational advances were ill-timed, laid the rest of the table things in a quick staccato, and whisked out of the room. When she returned, he was still standing there, like a man of stone, his back hunched, his collar turned up, his dripping hat brim turned down, hiding his face and ears completely. She put down the eggs and bacon with considerable emphasis, and called rather than said to him, "Your lunch is served, sir." "Thank you," he said at the same time, and did not stir until she was closing the door. Then he swung round and approached the table with a certain eager quickness. As she went behind the bar to the kitchen, she heard a sound repeated at regular intervals. Chirk, 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 it went, the sound of a spoon being rapidly whisked around a basin. "That girl," she said. "There, I clean forgot it. It's her being so long." And while she herself finished mixing the mustard, she gave Milly a few verbal stabs for her excessive slowness. She had cooked the ham and eggs, laid the table, and done everything, while Milly, help indeed, had only succeeded in delaying the mustard, and him a new guest and wanting to stay. Then she filled the mustard pot, and, putting it with a certain stateliness upon a golden black tea tray, carried it into the parlour. She rapped and entered promptly. As she did so, her visitor moved quickly, so that she got but a glimpse of a white object disappearing behind the table. It would seem he was picking something from the floor. She rapped down the mustard pot on the table, then she noticed the overcoat and hat had been taken off and put over a chair in front of the fire, and a pair of wet boots threatened rust to her steel fender. She went to these things resolutely. "I suppose I may have them to dry now," she said in a voice that brooked no denial. "Leave the hat," said her visitor in a muffled voice, and turning, she saw he had raised his head and was sitting and looking at her. For a moment she stood gaping at him, too surprised to speak. He held a white cloth, it was a serviette he had brought with him, over the lower part of his face, so that his mouth and jaws were completely hidden, and that was the reason of his muffled voice. But it was not that which startled Mrs. Hall. It was the fact that all his forehead above his blue glasses was covered by a white bandage, and that another covered his ears, leaving not a scrap of his face exposed, excepting only his pink, peaked nose. It was bright pink and shiny, just as it had been at first. He wore a dark brown velvet jacket with a high, black, linen-lined collar turned up about his neck. The thick black hair, escaping as it could below and between the cross bandages, projected in curious tails and horns, giving him the strangest appearance conceivable. This muffled and bandaged head was so unlike what she had anticipated that for a moment she was rigid. He did not remove the serviette, but remained holding it, as she saw now, with a brown gloved hand, and regarding her with his inscrutable blue glasses. "Leave the hat," he said, speaking very distinctly through the white cloth. Her nerves began to recover from the shock that they had received. She placed the hat on the chair again by the fire. I didn't know, sir," she began, "that—" and she stopped, embarrassed. "Thank you," he said dryly, glancing from her to the door, then at her again. "I'll have them nicely dried, sir, at once," she said, and carried his clothes out of the room. She glanced at his white swathed head and blue goggles again as she was going out of the door, but his napkin was still in front of his face. She shivered a little as she closed the door behind her, and her face was eloquent of her surprise and perplexity. "I never," she whispered. "There." She went quite softly to the kitchen and was too preoccupied to ask Milly what she was messing about with now when she got there. The visitor sat and listened to her retreating feet. He glanced inquiringly at the window before he removed his serviette and resumed his meal. He took a mouthful, glanced suspiciously at the window, took another mouthful, then rose, and, taking the serviette in his hand, walked across the room and pulled the blind down to the top of the white muslin that obscured the lower panes. This left the room in a twilight. This done, he returned with an easier air to the table and his meal. "The poor soul's had an accident or an operation or something," said Mrs. Hall. "What a turn them bandages did give me, to be sure." She put on some more coal, unfolded the clothes horse, and extended the traveller's coat upon this. "And they goggles! Why, he looked more like a diving helmet than a human man. She hung his muffler on a corner of the horse, and holding that handkerchief over his mouth all the time, talking through it. Perhaps his mouth was hurt too, maybe. She turned round as one who suddenly remembers. "Bless my soul alive," she said, going off at a tangent. "Ain't you done them taters yet, Milly?" When Mrs. Hall went to clear away the stranger's lunch, her idea that his mouth must also have been cut or disfigured in the accident she supposed him to have suffered was confirmed, for he was smoking a pipe, and all the time that she was in the room he never loosened the silk muffler he had wrapped around the lower part of his face to put the mouthpiece to his lips. Yet it was not forgetfulness, for she saw he glanced at it as it smouldered out. He sat in the corner with his back to the window blind and spoke now, having eaten and drunk and being comfortably warmed through, with less aggressive brevity than before. The reflection of the fire lent a kind of red animation to his big spectacles that they had lacked hitherto. "I have some luggage," he said, "at Bramblehurst Station," and he asked her how he could have it sent. He bowed his bandaged head quite politely in acknowledgement of her explanation. "Tomorrow," he said, "there is no speedier delivery?" and seemed quite disappointed when she answered no. Was she quite sure? No man with a trap could go over? Mrs. Hall, nothing loath, answered his questions and developed a conversation. "It's a steep road by the down, sir," she said in answer to the question about a trap, and then, snatching at an opening, said, "It was there a carriage was upsettled a year ago and more. A gentleman killed besides his coachman. Accidents, sir, happen in a moment, don't they?" But the visitor was not to be drawn so easily. "They do," he said through his muffler, eyeing her quietly through his impenetrable glasses. "But they take long enough to get well, don't they? There was my sister's son, Tom, just cut his arm with a scythe and tumbled on it in the hayfield, and, bless me, he was 3 months tied up, sir. You hardly believe it. It's regular, given the dread of a scythe, sir." "I can quite understand that," said the visitor. "He was afraid one time that he'd have to have an operation. It was that bad, sir." The visitor laughed abruptly, a bark of a laugh that he seemed to bite and kill in his mouth. "Was he?" said. "He was, sir, and no laughing matter to them as had for doing for him, as I had. My sister being took up with her little one so much, there was bandages to do, sir, and bandages to undo. So that, if I might be so bold as to say, sir—" "Will you get me some matches?" said the visitor quite abruptly. "My pipe is out." Mrs. Hall was pulled up suddenly. It was certainly rude of him, after telling him all she had done. She gasped at him for a moment, and then remembered the 2 sovereigns, and she went for the matches. "Thanks," he said concisely as she put them down, and turned his shoulder upon her and stared out of the window again. It was altogether too discouraging. Evidently he was sensitive on the topic of operations and bandages. She did not make so bold as to say, however, after all. But his snubbing way had irritated her, and Milly had a hot time of it that afternoon. The visitor remained in the parlour until 4 o'clock, without giving the ghost of an excuse for an intrusion. For the most part he was quite still during that time. As it would seem, he sat in the growing darkness, smoking in the firelight, perhaps dozing. Once or twice a curious listener might have heard him at the coals, and for the space of 5 minutes he was audible pacing the room. He seemed to be talking to himself. Then the armchair creaked as he sat down again. Chapter 2. Mr. Teddy Henfrey's First Impressions. At 4 o'clock, when it was fairly dark and Mrs. Hall was screwing up her courage to go in and ask her visitor if he would take some tea, Teddy Henfrey, the clock jobber, came into the bar. "My sakes, Mrs. Hall," said he, "but this is terrible weather for thin boots." The snow outside was falling faster. Mrs. Hall agreed, and then noticed he had his bag with him. "Now you're here, Mr. Teddy," said she, "I'd be glad if you'd give the old clock in the parlour a bit of a look. 'Tis going, and it strikes well and hearty, but the hour hand won't do nothing but point at 6. And, leading the way, she went across to the parlour door and rapped and entered. Her visitor, she saw as she opened the door, was seated in the armchair before the fire, dozing, it would seem, with his bandaged head drooping on one side. The only light in the room was the red glow from the fire, which lit his eyes like adverse railway signals, but left his downcast face in darkness, and the scanty vestiges of the day that came in through the open door. Everything was ruddy, shadowy, and indistinct to her, the more so since she had just been lighting the bar lamp and her eyes were dazzled. But for a second it seemed to her that the man she looked at had an enormous mouth wide open, a vast and incredible mouth that swallowed the whole of the lower portion of his face. It was the sensation of a moment, the white bound head, the monstrous goggle eyes, and this huge yawn below it. Then he started up in his chair, put up his hand. She opened the door wide so that the room was lighter, and she saw him more clearly, with the muffler held up to his face, just as she had seen him hold the serviette before. The shadows, she fancied, had tricked her. "Would you mind, sir, this man are coming to look at the clock, sir?" she said, recovering from the momentary shock. "Look at the clock?" he said, staring round in a drowsing manner and speaking over his head, and then, getting more fully awake, "Certainly." Mrs. Hall went away to get a lamp, and he rose and stretched himself. Then came the light, and Mr. Teddy Henfrey, entering, was confronted by this bandaged person. He was, he says, taken aback. "Good afternoon," said the stranger, regarding him, as Mr. Henfrey says, with a vivid sense of the dark spectacles, like a lobster. "I hope," said Mr. Henfrey, "that it's no intrusion." "None whatever," said the stranger, "though I understand," he said, turning to Mrs. Hall, "that this room is really to be mine for my own private use." "I thought, sir," said Mrs. Hall, "you'd prefer the clock." "Certainly," said the stranger, "certainly, but as a rule, I like to be alone and undisturbed." "But I'm really glad to have the clock seen to," he said, seeing a certain hesitation in Mr. Henfrey's manner. "Very glad." Mr. Henfrey had intended to apologize and withdraw, but this anticipation reassured him. The stranger turned round with his back to the fireplace and put his hands behind his back. "And presently," he said, "when the clock mending is over, I think I should like to have some tea, but not till the clock mending is over." Mrs. Hall was about to leave the room. She made no conversational advances this time, because she did not want to be snubbed in front of Mr. Henfrey, when her visitor asked her if she had made any arrangements about his boxes at Bramblehurst. She told him she had mentioned the matter to the postman, and that the carrier could bring them over on the morrow. "You are certain that that is the earliest?" he said. She was certain, with a marked coldness. "I should explain," he added, "what I was really too cold and fatigued to do before, that I am an experimental investigator." "Indeed, sir," said Mrs. Hall, much impressed. "And my baggage contains apparatus and appliances." "Very useful things indeed they are, sir," said Mrs. Hall. "And I'm very naturally anxious to get on with my inquiries." "Of course, sir." "My reason for coming to Iping," he proceeded with a certain deliberation of manner, "was a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. In addition to my work, an accident—" "I thought as much," said Mrs. Hall to herself. "An accident necessitates a certain retirement. My eyes are sometimes so weak and painful that I have shut myself up in the dark for hours together. Lock myself up. Sometimes, now and then. Not at present, certainly. But at such times, the slightest disturbance, the entry of a stranger into the room, is a source of excruciating annoyance to me. It is well these things should be understood." "Certainly, sir," said Mrs. Hall, "and if I might make so bold as to ask—" "That, I think, is all," said the stranger, with that quietly irresistible air of finality he could assume at will. Mrs. Hall reserved her question and sympathy for a better occasion. After Mrs. Hall had left the room, he remained standing in front of the fire, glaring, so Mr. Henfrey puts it, at the clock mending. Mr. Henfrey not only took off the hands of the clock and the face, but extracted the works, and he tried to work in as slow and quiet and unassuming manner as possible. He worked with the lamp close to him, and the green shade threw a brilliant light upon his hands and upon the frame and wheels, and left the rest of the room shadowy. When he looked up, coloured patches swam in his eyes. Being constitutionally of a curious nature, he had removed the works, a quite unnecessary proceeding, with the idea of delaying his departure and perhaps falling into conversation with the stranger. But the stranger stood there, perfectly silent and still. So still, it got on Henfrey's nerves. He felt alone in the room and looked up, and there, grey and dim, was the bandaged head and huge blue lenses staring fixedly with a mist of green spots drifting in front of them. It was so uncanny to Henfrey that, for a minute, they remained staring blankly at one another. Then Henfrey looked down again. Very uncomfortable position. One would like to say something. Should he remark that the weather was very cold for the time of the year? He looked up as if to take aim with that introductory shot. "The weather," he began. "Why don't you finish and go?" said the rigid figure, evidently in a state of painfully suppressed rage. "All you've got to do is fix the hour hand on its axle. You're simply humbugging." "Certainly, sir. 1 minute more. I overlooked," and Mr. Henfrey finished and went. But he was feeling excessively annoyed. "Damn it," said Mr. Henfrey to himself, trudging down the village through the thawing snow. "A man must do a clock at times, surely." And again, "Can't a man look at you?" Ugly. And yet again, seemingly not. If the police was wanting you, you wouldn't be more wrapped and bandaged. At Gleason's corner he saw Hall, who had recently married the stranger's hostess at the Coach and Horses, and who now drove the Iping conveyance, when occasional people required it, to Sidderbridge Junction, coming towards him on his return from that place. Hall had evidently been stopping a bit at Sidderbridge, to judge by his driving. "How do, Teddy?" he said, passing. "You've got a rummun up at home," said Teddy. Hall very socially pulled up. "What's that?" he said. "Rum-looking customer stopping at the Coach and Horses," said Teddy. "My sakes." And he proceeded to give Hall a vivid description of his grotesque guest. "Looks a bit like a disguise, don't it? I'd like to see a man's face if I had him stopping in my place," said Henfrey. "But women are that trustful when strangers are concerned." "He's took your rooms and he ain't even given a name, Hall." "You don't say so," said Hall, who was a man of sluggish apprehension. "Yes," said Teddy, "by the week. Whatever he is, you can't get rid of him under the week. And he's got a lot of luggage coming tomorrow, so he says. Let's hope it won't be stones in boxes, Hal." He told Hall how his aunt at Hastings had been swindled by a stranger with empty portmanteau. Altogether, he left Hall vaguely suspicious. "Get up, old girl," said Hall. "I suppose I must see about this." Teddy trudged on his way with his mind considerably relieved. Instead of seeing about it, however, Hall on his return was severely rated by his wife on the length of time he had spent in Sidderbridge, and his mild inquiries were answered snappishly and in a manner not to the point. But the seed of suspicion Teddy had sown germinated in the mind of Mr. Hall, in spite of these discouragements. "You women don't know anything," said Mr. Hall, resolved to ascertain more about the personality of his guest at the earliest possible opportunity. And after the stranger had gone to bed, which he did about 9:30, Mr. Hall went very aggressively into the parlour and looked very hard at his wife's furniture, just to show that the stranger wasn't master there, and scrutinized closely and a little contemptuously a sheet of mathematical computations the stranger had left. When retiring for the night, he instructed Mrs. Hall to look very closely at the stranger's luggage when it came the next day. "You mind your own business, Hall," said Mrs. Hall, "and I'll mind mine." She was all the more inclined to snap at Hall, because the stranger was undoubtedly an unusually strange sort of stranger, and she was by no means assured about him in her own mind. In the middle of the night, she woke up dreaming of huge white heads like turnips that came trailing after her at the end of interminable necks, and with vast black eyes. But, being a sensible woman, she subdued her terrors, and turned over and went to sleep again. End of chapter 2. Recorded by Alex Foster, www.alexfoster.me.uk, in Nottingham, England, on the 13th of March 2006. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit www.librivox.org. Today's reading by Alex Foster. www.alexfoster.me.uk. E. Wells. 1 bottles. It was that on the 29th day of February, at the beginning of the thaw, a singular person fell out of infinity into Iping village. Next day, his luggage arrived through the slush, and very remarkable luggage it was. There were a couple of trunks indeed, such as a rational man might need, but in addition, there were a box of books, big, fat books of which some were comprehensible handwriting, and a dozen or more crates, boxes and cases, containing objects packed in straw, as it seemed to Hall, tugging with a casual curiosity at the straw, glass bottles. The stranger, muffled in hat, coat, gloves, and wrapper, came out impatiently to meet Fearenside's cart, while Hall, who was having a word or so of gossip preparatory to helping them in, out he came, not noticing Fearenside's dog, who was sniffing in a dilettante spirit at Hall's legs. "Come along with those boxes," he said. "I've been waiting long enough." And he came down the steps towards the tail of the cart, as if to lay hands on the smaller crate. No sooner had Fearenside's dog caught sight of him, however, than it began to bristle and growl savagely, and when he rushed down the steps, it gave an undecided hop and then sprang straight at his hand. "Ugh!" cried Hall, jumping back, for he was no hero with dogs, and Fearenside howled, "Lie down!" and snatched his whip. They saw the dog's teeth had slipped the hand, heard a kick, saw the dog execute a flanking jump and get home on the stranger's leg, and heard the rip of his trousering. Then the finer end of Fearenside's whip reached his property, and the dog, yelping with dismay, retreated under the wheels of the wagon. It was all the business of a swift half-minute. No one spoke. Everyone shouted. The stranger glanced swiftly at his torn glove and at his leg, made as if he would stoop to the latter, then turned and rushed swiftly up the steps into the inn. They heard him go headlong across the passage and up the uncarpeted steps to his bedroom. "You brute, you," said Fearenside, climbing off the wagon with his whip in his hand while the dog watched him through the wheel. "Come here," said Fearenside. "You'd better—" Hall had stood gaping. "He was bit," said Hall. "I'd better go to see to him." And he trotted after the stranger. He met Mrs. Hall in the passage. "Carrier's dog," he said. "Bitten." He went straight upstairs, and the stranger's door being ajar, he pushed it open and was entering without any ceremony, being of a naturally sympathetic turn of mind. The blind was down and the room dim. He caught a glimpse of a most singular thing, what seemed a handless arm waving towards him, and a face of 3 huge indeterminate spots on white, very like the face of a pale pansy. Then he was struck violently in the chest, hurled back, and the door slammed in his face and locked. It was so rapid that it gave him no time to observe. A waving of indecipherable shapes, a blow, and a concussion. There he stood on the dark little landing, wondering what it might have been that he had seen. A couple of minutes later, he rejoined the little group that had formed outside the coach and horses. There was Fearenside, telling about it all over again for the second time. There was Mrs. Hall, saying his dog didn't have no business to bite her guests. There was Huckster, the general dealer from over the road, interrogative, and Sandy Wedges from the forge, judicial, besides women and children, all of them saying fatuities. "I wouldn't let him bite in me, I knows. It hasn't right to have such dogs. What he biting for, then?" and so forth. Mrs. Hall, staring at them from the steps and listening, found it incredible that he had seen anything so very remarkable happen upstairs. Besides, his vocabulary was altogether too limited to express his impressions. "He don't want no help, he says," he said in answer to his wife's inquiry. "We'd better be taking of his luggage in." "You ought to have it cauterized at once," said Mr. Huckster, "especially if it's all inflamed." "I'd shoot, and that's what I'd do," said a lady in the group. Suddenly the dog began growling again. "Come along," cried an angry voice in the doorway, and there stood the muffled stranger with his collar turned up and his hat brim bent down. "The sooner you get those things in, the better I'll be pleased." It is stated by an anonymous bystander that his trousers and gloves had been changed. "Was you hurt, sir?" said Fearenside. "I'm rare sorry the dog—" "Not a bit," said the stranger. "Never broke the skin. Hurry up with those things." He then swore to himself, so Mr. Hall asserts. Directly the first crate was in accordance with his directions, carried into the parlour, the stranger flung himself upon it with extraordinary eagerness and began to unpack it, scattering the straw with an utter disregard of Mrs. Hall's carpet. And from it he began to produce bottles, little fat bottles containing powders, small and slender bottles containing coloured and white fluids, fluted blue bottles labelled poison, bottles with round bodies and slender necks, large green glass bottles, large white glass bottles, bottles with glass stoppers and frosted labels, bottles with fine corks, bottles with bungs, bottles with wooden caps, wine bottles, salad oil bottles. Putting them in rows on the chiffonier, on the mantel, on the table under the window, round the floor, on the bookshelf, everywhere. The chemist's shop in Bramblehurst could not boast half so many. Quite a sight it was. Crate after crate yielded bottles until all 6 were empty, and the table high with straw. The only things that came out of these crates beside the bottles were a number of test tubes and a carefully packed balance. And directly the crates were unpacked, the stranger went to the window and set to work, not troubling in the least about the litter of straw, the fire which had gone out, the box of books outside, nor for the trunks and other luggage that had gone upstairs. When Mrs. Hall took his dinner to him, he was already so absorbed in his work, pouring little drops out of the bottles in test tubes, that he did not hear her until she had swept away the bulk of the straw and put the tray on the table, with some little emphasis perhaps, seeing the state that her floor was in. Then he half turned his head and immediately turned it away again. But she saw he had removed his glasses. They were beside him on the table, and it seemed to her that his eye sockets were extraordinarily hollow. He put on his spectacles again and then turned and faced her. She was about to complain of the straw on the floor when he anticipated her. "I wish you wouldn't come in without knocking," he said in the tone of abnormal exasperation that seemed so characteristic of him. "I knocked, but seemingly... Perhaps you did. But in my investigations, my really very urgent and necessary investigations, the slightest disturbance, the jar of a door... I must ask you..." "Certainly, sir. You can turn the lock if you're like that, you know. Any time." "A very good idea," said the stranger. "This straw, sir, if I can be so bold as to remark..." "Don't. If the straw makes trouble, put it down in the bill." And he mumbled at her, words suspiciously like curses. He was so odd, standing there, so aggressive and explosive, bottle in one hand and test tube in the other, that Mrs. Hall was quite alarmed. But she was a resolute woman. "In which case, I should like to know, sir, what you consider..." "A shilling. Put down a shilling. Surely a shilling's enough." "So be it," said Mrs. Hall, taking up the tablecloth and beginning to spread it over the table. "If you're satisfied, of course." He turned and sat down with his coat collar toward her. All the afternoon he worked with the door locked, and, as Mrs. Hall testifies, for the most part in silence. But once there was a concussion and a sound of bottles ringing together, as though the table had been hit, and the smash of a bottle bit flung violently down, and then a rapid pacing athwart the room. Fearing something was the matter, she went to the door and listened, not caring to knock. "I can't go on," he was raving. "I can't go on. 300,000, 400,000, the huge multitude cheated. All my life it may take me. Patience, patience indeed. Fool, fool." There was a noise of hobnails on the bricks in the bar, and Mrs. Hall had very reluctantly to leave the rest of his soliloquy. When she returned, the room was silent again, save for the faint crepitation of his chair and the occasional clink of a bottle. It was all over. The stranger had resumed his work. When she took in his tea, she saw broken glass in the corner of the room under the concave mirror, and a golden stain that had been carelessly wiped. She called attention to it. "Put it down in the bill," snapped her visitor. "For God's sake, don't worry me. If there's damage done, put it down in the bill." And he went on ticking a list in the exercise book before him. "I'll tell you something," said Fearenside mysteriously. It was late in the afternoon, and they were in the little beer shop of Iping Hanger. "Well," said Teddy Henry. "This chap you're speaking of, what my dog bit, well, he's black. Leastways his legs are. I see through the tear of his trousers and the tear of his glove. You'd have expected a sort of pinky to show, wouldn't you? Well, there wasn't none. Just blackness. I tell you, he's as black as my hat. My sakes, said Henfried, it's a rummy case altogether. Why, his nose is as pink as paint. That's true, said Fearnside. I knows that, and I tell you what I'm thinking. That man's a piebald, Teddy, black here and white there in patches. And he's ashamed of it. He's a kind of half-breed, and the colours come off patchy instead of mixing. I've heard of such things before, and it's the common way with horses, as anyone can see. Chapter 4. Mr. Cuss interviews the stranger. I have told the circumstances of the stranger's arrival in Iping with a certain fullness of detail, in order that the curious impression he created may be understood by the reader. But, excepting two odd incidents, the circumstances of his stay until the extraordinary day of the club festival may be passed over very cursorily. There were a number of skirmishes with Mrs. Hall on matters of domestic discipline, but in every case until late April, when the first signs of penury began, he overrode her by the easy expedient of an extra payment. Hall did not like him, and whenever he dared, he talked of the advisability of getting rid of him. But he showed his dislike chiefly by concealing it ostentatiously and avoiding his visitor as much as possible. Wait till the summer, said Mrs. Hall sagely, when the artistes are beginning to come. Then we'll see. He may be a bit overbearing, but Bill's settled punctual is Bill's settled punctual, whatever you'd like to say. The stranger did not go to church, and indeed made no difference between Sunday and the irreligious days, even in costume. He worked, as Mrs. Hall thought, very fitfully. Some days he would come down early and be continuously busy. On others he would rise late, pace his room, fretting audibly for hours together, smoke, sleep in the armchair by the fire. Communication with the world beyond the village he had none. His temper continued very uncertain. For the most part, his manner was that of a man suffering under almost unendurable provocation, and once or twice things were snapped, torn, crushed, or broken in spasmodic gusts of violence. He seemed under a chronic irritation of greatest intensity. His habit of talking to himself in a low voice grew steadily upon him, but though Mrs. Hall listened conscientiously, she could make neither head nor tail of what she heard. He rarely went abroad by daylight, but at twilight he would go out, muffled up invisibly, whether the weather were cold or not, and he chose the loneliest paths and those most overshadowed by trees and banks. His goggling spectacles and ghastly bandaged face under the penthouse of his hat came with a disagreeable suddenness out of the darkness upon one or two home-going labourers, and Teddy Henfrey, tumbling out of the scarlet coat one night at 9:30, was scared shamefully by the stranger's skull-like head. He was walking hat in hand, lit by the sudden light of the opened inn door. Such children as saw him at full dreamt of bogies, and it seemed doubtful whether he disliked boys more than they disliked him, or the reverse. But there was certainly a vivid enough dislike on either side. It was inevitable that a person of so remarkable an appearance and bearing should form a frequent topic in such a village as Iping. Opinion was greatly divided about his occupation. Mrs. Hall was sensitive on the point. When questioned, she explained very carefully that he was an experimental investigator, going gingerly over the syllables as one who dreads pitfalls. When asked what an experimental investigator was, she would say with a touch of superiority that most educated people knew such things as that, and would thus explain that he discovered things. Her visitor had had an accident, she said, which temporarily discoloured his face and hands, and, being of a sensitive disposition, he was averse to any public notice of the fact. Out of her hearing, there was a view largely entertained that he was a criminal trying to escape from justice by wrapping himself up so as to conceal himself altogether from the eye of the police. This idea sprang from the brain of Mr. Teddy Henfrey. No crime of any magnitude dating from the middle or end of February was known to have occurred. Elaborated in the imagination of Mr. Gould, the probationary assistant in the National School, this theory took the form that the stranger was an anarchist in disguise, preparing explosives, and he resolved to undertake such detective operations as his time permitted. These consisted for the most part in looking very hard at the stranger whenever they met, or in asking people who had never seen the stranger leading questions about him. But he detected nothing. Another school of opinion followed Mr. Fearnside, and either accepted the piebald view or some modification of it, as, for instance, Silas Durgan, who was heard to assert, if he chooses to show himself at fairs, he'll make his fortune in no time, and, being a bit of a theologian, compared the stranger to the man with the one talent. Yet another view explained the entire man by regarding the stranger as a harmless lunatic. That had the advantage of accounting for everything straight away. Between these main groups there were waverers and compromisers. Sussex folk have few superstitions, and it was only after the events of early April that the thought of the supernatural was first whispered in the village. Even then it was only credited among the women folk. But whatever they thought of him, people in Iping on the whole agreed in disliking him. His irritability, though it might have been comprehensible to an urban brain worker, was an amazing thing to these quiet Sussex villagers. The frantic gesticulations they surprised now and then, the headlong pace after nightfall that swept him upon them round quiet corners, the inhuman bludgeoning of all tentative advances of curiosity, the taste for twilight that led to the closing of doors, the pulling of blinds, the extinction of candles and lamps. Who could agree with such goings-on? They drew aside as he passed down the village, and when he had gone by, young humorists would go up with coat collars and down with hat brims, and go pacing nervously after him in imitation of his occult bearing. There was a song popular at the time called The Bogeyman. Miss Satchel sang it in the schoolroom concert in aid of the church lamps, and thereafter, whenever one of the two villages were gathered together and the stranger appeared, a bar or so of this tune, more or less sharp or flat, was whistled in the midst of them. Also, belated little children would call Bogeyman after him and make off tremulously elated. Cuss, the general practitioner, was devoured by curiosity. The bandages excited his professional interest. The report of the 1,001 bottles aroused his jealous regard. All through April and May he coveted an opportunity of talking to the stranger, and at last, towards Whitsuntide, he could stand it no longer, but hit upon the subscription list for a village nurse as an excuse. He was surprised to find that Mr. Hall did not know his guest's name. "He give her name," said Mrs. Hall, an assertion which was quite unfounded, "but I didn't rightly hear it." She thought it seemed so silly not to know the man's name. Cuss rapped at the parlour door and entered. There was a fairly audible imprecation from within. "Pardon my intrusion," said Cuss, and then the door closed and cut Mrs. Hall off from the rest of the conversation. She could hear the murmur of voices for the next 10 minutes, then a cry of surprise, a stirring of feet, a chair flung aside, a bark of laughter, quick steps to the door, and Cuss appeared, his face white, his eyes staring over his shoulder. He left the door open behind him and, without looking at her, strode across the hall and went down the steps, and she heard his feet hurrying along the road. He carried his hat in his hand. She stood behind the door, looking at the open door of the parlour. Then she heard the stranger laughing quietly, and his footsteps came across the room. She could not see his face where she stood. The parlour door slammed, and the place was silent again. Cuss went straight up to the village to Bunting, the vicar. "Am I mad?" Cuss began abruptly as he entered the shabby little study. "Do I look like an insane person?" "What's happened?" said the vicar, putting the ammonite on the loose sheets of his forthcoming sermon. "The chap at the inn." "Well?" "Give me something to drink," said Cuss, and he sat down. When his nerves had been steadied by a glass of cheap sherry, the only drink the good vicar had available, he told him of the interview he had just had. "Went in," he gasped, "and began to demand a subscription for that nurse fund. He'd stuck his hands in his pockets as I came in, and he sat down lumpily in his chair. Sniffed. I told him I'd heard he took an interest in scientific things. He said, yes. Sniffed again, kept on sniffing all the time, evidently recently caught an infernal cold. No wonder, wrapped up like that. I developed the nurse idea, and all the while kept my eyes open. Bottles, chemicals, everywhere. Balance, test tubes in stands, and a smell of evening primrose. Would he subscribe? Said he'd considered it. Asked him point blank, was he researching? Said he was. A long research? Got quite cross. A damnable long research, said he, blowing the cork out, so to speak. Oh, said I. And out came the grievance. The man was just on the boil, and my question boiled him over. He had been given a prescription, A most valuable prescription, although what for he wouldn't say. Was it medical? Damn you, what are you fishing after? I apologize. Dignified sniff and cough. He resumed. He'd read it. 5 ingredients. Put it down, turned his head. Draught of air from window lifted the paper. Swish, rustle. He was working in a room with an open fireplace, he saw. Saw a flicker, and there was the prescription burning and lifting chimneywood. Rushed towards it just as it whisked up the chimney. So, just at that point, to illustrate his story, out came his arm. Well? No hand. Just an empty sleeve. Lord, I thought, that's a deformity. Got a cork arm, I suppose, and has taken it off. Then I thought, there's something odd in that. What the devil keeps the sleeve up and open if there's nothing in it? There was nothing in it, I tell you. Nothing down it, right down to the joint. I could see right down it to the elbow, and there was a glimmer of light shining in through a tear of cloth. Good God, I said. Then he stopped, stared at me with those black goggles of his, and then at his sleeve. Well? That's all. He never said a word, just glared, and put his sleeve back in his pocket quietly. I was saying, said he, that there was the prescription burning, wasn't I?
What's wrong, guys?
Interrogative cough. How the devil, said I, can you move an empty sleeve like that? Empty sleeve? Yes, said I, an empty sleeve.
Lay down.
It's an empty sleeve, is it? You saw it as an empty sleeve.
Lay down.
He stood up right away. I stood up too. He came towards me in 3 very slow steps and stood quite close. Sniffed venomously. I didn't flinch, though I'm hanged if that bandaged knob of his and those blinkers aren't enough to unnerve anyone coming quietly up to you. You said it was an empty sleeve, he said. Certainly, I said. At staring and saying nothing, a barefaced man, unspectacled, starts scratch. Then, very quietly, he pulled his sleeve out of his pocket again and raised his arm towards me as though he would show it to me again. He did it very, very slowly. I looked at it. Seemed an age. Well, said I, clearing my throat, there's nothing in it. I had to say something. I was beginning to feel frightened. I could see right down it. He extended it straight towards me, slowly, slowly, just like that, until the cuff was 6 inches from my face. Queer thing to see an empty sleeve come at you like that. And then, well, something, exactly like a finger and thumb it felt, nipped my nose. Bunting began to laugh. There wasn't anything there, said Cuss, his voice running up into a shriek at the there. It's all very well for you to laugh, but I tell you I was so startled I hit his cuff hard and turned around and cut out of the room. I left him. Cuss stopped. There was no mistaking the sincerity of his panic. He turned round in a helpless way and took a second glass of the excellent Vicar's very inferior sherry. When I hit his cuff, said Cuss, I tell you it felt exactly like hitting an arm. And there wasn't an arm. There wasn't the ghost of an arm. Mr. Bunting thought it over. He looked suspiciously at Cuss. It's a most remarkable story, he said. He looked very wise and grave indeed. It's really, said Mr. Bunting with judicial emphasis, a most remarkable story. End of chapter 4. Recorded in Nottingham, England on the 13th of March 2006 by Alex Foster. www.alexfoster.me.uk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit www.librivox.org. Today's reading by Alex Foster, www.alexfoster.me.uk. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Chapter 5. The Burglary at the Vicarage. The facts of the burglary at the vicarage came to us chiefly through the medium of the vicar and his wife. It occurred in the small hours of Whit Monday, the day devoted in Iping to the club festivities. Mrs. Bunting, it seems, woke up suddenly in the stillness that comes before the dawn, with the strong impression that the door of their bedroom had opened and closed. She did not arouse her husband at first, but sat up in bed, listening. She then distinctly heard the pad, pad, pad of bare feet coming out of the adjoining dressing room and walking along the passage towards the staircase. As soon as she felt assured of this, she aroused the Reverend Mr. Bunting as quietly as possible. He did not strike a light, but putting on his spectacles, her dressing gown, and his bath slippers, he went out onto the landing to listen. He heard quite distinctly a fumbling going on at his study desk downstairs, and then a violent sneeze. At that he returned to his bedroom, armed himself with the most obvious weapon, the poker, and descended the staircase as noiselessly as possible. Mr. Bunting came out on the landing. The hour was about 4, and the ultimate darkness of the night was past. There was a faint shimmer of light in the hall, but the study doorway yawned impenetrably black. Everything was still except the faint creaking of the stairs under Mr. Bunting's tread and the slight movements in the study. Then something snapped, the drawer was open, and there was a rustle of papers. Then came an imprecation, and a match was struck, and the study was flooded with yellow light. Mr. Bunting was now in the hall, and through the crack in the door he could see the desk and the open drawer and a candle burning on the desk, but the robber he could not see. He stood there in the hall, undecided what to do, and Mrs. Bunting, her face white and intent, crept slowly downstairs after him. One thing kept Mr. Bunting's courage, the persuasion that this burglar was a resident in the village. They heard the chink of money and realized that the robber had found the housekeeping reserve of gold, £2.10 in half sovereigns altogether. At that sound, Mr. Bunting was nerved to abrupt action. Gripping the poker firmly, he rushed into the room, closely followed by Mrs. Bunting. "Surrender!" cried Mr. Bunting fiercely, and then stooped amazed. Apparently the room was perfectly empty. Yet their conviction that they had that very moment heard someone moving in the room had amounted to a certainty. For half a minute perhaps they stood gaping. Then Mrs. Bunting went across the room and looked behind the screen, while Mr. Bunting, by a kindred impulse, peered under the desk. Then Mrs. Bunting turned back the window curtains, and Mr. Bunting looked up the chimney and probed it with the poker. Then Mrs. Bunting scrutinized the waste paper basket, and Mr. Bunting opened the lid of the coal scuttle. Then they came to a stop and stood with eyes interrogating each other. "I could have sworn," said Mr. Bunting. "The candle," said Mrs. Bunting. "Who lit the candle?" "The drawer," said Mr. Bunting, "and the money's gone." She went hastily to the doorway. Of all the strange occurrences. There was a violent sneeze in the passage. They rushed out, and as they did so, the kitchen door slammed. "Bring the candle," said Mr. Bunting, and led the way. They both heard a sound of bolts being hastily shot back. As he opened the kitchen door, he saw through the scullery that the back door was just opening, and the faint light of early dawn displayed the dark masses of the garden beyond. He is certain that nothing went out of the door. It opened, stood open for a moment, and then closed with a slam. As it did so, the candle Mrs. Bunting was carrying from the study flickered and flared. It was a moment or more before they entered the kitchen. The place was empty. They refastened the back door, examined the kitchen, pantry, and scullery thoroughly, and at last went down into the cellar. There was not a soul to be found in the house, search as they would. Daylight found the vicar and his wife, a quaintly costumed little couple, still marvelling about on their own ground floor by the unnecessary light of a guttering candle. Chapter 6. The Furniture That Went Mad. Now it happened that in the early hours of Whit Monday, before Milly was hunted out for the day, Mr. Hall and Mrs. Hall both rose and went noiselessly down into the cellar. Their business there was of a private nature, and had something to do with the specific gravity of their beer. They had hardly entered the cellar when Mrs. Hall found she had forgotten to bring down a bottle of sarsaparilla from their joint room. As she was the expert and principal operator in this affair, Hall very properly went upstairs for it. On the landing, he was surprised to see that the stranger's door was ajar. He went on into his own room and found the bottle as he had been directed.
It's okay, Snoopy. Give me a second. All right, everyone. I'm gonna call end the life for tonight. We start a new book tomorrow. I just don't know which book yet. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.